Development Committee. And if the clerk would call the roll, I'm sorry, and it's the public hearing, my error, at 7 p.m.
Alderman Jettie? Here. Alderman David Tenza?
Present.
Alderman Brandon Laws? Alderman Jan Schmidt is here, and Chair Malisi Golia?
I'm present. We have all our members in attendance. We also have Alderman McCarthy, Alderwoman Kelly, Alderman Dowd, Alderman Klee, Alderman Lopez. I thought I saw the mayor, Director Marchant, Director Photo, and Ms. Kleiner from the mayor's office. So the first, the item on our public hearing is O18026, amending the zoning map by rezoning 2 areas of land on Amherst Street from Airport Industrial AI to Park Industrial with mixed-use overlay district. And who would like to give the explanation? Director Marchant? Thank you. And she will give us a brief explanation. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, thank you. This will be very brief in the looking at your agenda tonight. So I'm happy to give a quick overview of these. And if you have questions, I guess those are later, but please let me know. So the purpose of this first ordinance is to rezone a section of land that is currently the airport industrial. And it is directly abuts Amherst Street and is cut off from the airport by the railroad tracks. So it's north of the airport, south of Amherst Street. This area we are proposing to go from AI Airport Industrial to PI Park Industrial Mixed Use. So what does that mean? The underlying zoning will remain industrial, so the uses that are industrial and the uses there would not become non-conforming. What it does, though, by adding the park industrial and the mixed-use overlay is that it allows for the flexibility to actually reflect what's going on these lots. These lots are oriented to Amherst Street, not to the airport, and we did an analysis of all the variances that have been granted over the years, and that's kind of what was the impetus behind this. And so this area has changed significantly from being a very industrial area to be very much reflective of Amherst Street. And when you look at the zoning map, sorry, of course it's going to pause. The areas on the other side of Amherst Street are GB and HB. And so it's kind of a mishmash of zoning right now, and this allows it to have the flexibility so that many of the uses that are there that would have to come back and get a variance for changes, it opens it up to allow those to be allowed through the planning board process, mostly through conditional use permit or by the submission of a suitability report to the planning board. A suitability report includes these items, and it allows the planning board to understand that if the use is compatible with its neighbors, with its surroundings, traffic impacts. And so they go through all of that as part of an analysis with a mixed-use property overlay. So again, here's the map on that one, and I can move on to the next one if you'd like.
Please.
Okay, so the second change proposed that goes hand in hand is the airport approach zone. These updates are proposed to reflect the new runway length, new as in 4 years, 5 years. And so with the extended length of the runway, there were areas of this airport approach zone that needed to be updated, lengthened specifically. And so these are updates to those regulations. We have done these updates in conversation with the airport and with their consultants, the Gale Associates. So the airport approach zone, and I'm sorry, it's hard to read on this map. It's a 3-dimensional thing. It's an X, Y, and Z, so it's very hard for me to show you a map of like on the traditional zoning map. But it's basically from the east and west of the airport, there's a triangular shape that goes out and up for the Z dimension. The further away you get, the higher in the air it is. And what this does is it makes sure that really tall buildings cannot be built in the airport approach zone, that there isn't anything that would interfere with our airport. They really want to be good neighbors, and they can be good neighbors. They're there first, and they can be good neighbors if the uses that are built around them are compatible with airport uses. The other major update, besides the length and distance dimensions of that, are updating, removing a reference to a noise exposure map, which is no longer valid, and updating the land use compatibility table to work with sound and noise. And so as we are opening up some of the uses allowed in the vicinity of this, what it does is it goes through the table and it requires, if you're going to build specific type of uses within a certain distance of the airport, that you would have to build to a little bit higher noise reduction standard in the building. And so these are, this table comes from some federal standards. These are pretty normal. And the idea is to make sure that if you are going to allow for some uses within the airport zone, that again, they want to be good neighbors. They're going to be as loud as they are today, tomorrow. And so adding new uses in, making sure that the buildings are there to reduce the noise that somebody might be hearing next door, and to hopefully keep everybody in the neighborhood happy.
Thank you.
That's the full presentation.
Thank you. So there are two ordinances that Director Marchant spoke to. I am going to just take testimony now regarding 018-026, amending the zoning map by rezoning the two areas from airport industrial to park industrial with mixed-use overlay district. And is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor? And when you come to the mic, please state your name and address. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the board. For the record, my name is Gerald Prunier. I'm an attorney with offices at 20 Trafalgar Square in Nashua, New Hampshire. The area that Ms. Marchant talked about on Amherst Street has been very good to me. I've been able to make a substantial living getting variances for clients in that. But the ordinance is very important, I think, for the opening of some of the areas in the city of Nashua. I think there are other areas that have to get opened as well, but this area, the development of it, as I've seen it, is not what it was designed for. Originally, when it was put in airport industrial, it was the hope that there'd be many warehouses and cargo planes would land and they'd cross over and be able to put in the warehouses, and it would be that type of a center. With the railroad being there and not being discontinued, with a second airstrip being proposed on that side, that will not happen. So I think it's important that we open up that area, and the proposed ordinance does that to a great degree. So I'm in favor of that happening, reluctantly.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members, Mr. Mayor. My name is David Rasnick. I'm an attorney in Boston. I represent a corporation called Fabraze, and their sister corporation is Microwave Development Labs. Fabraze has owned the property at 476 Amherst for almost 70 years. They also own property on Progress Avenue. Recently, they have consolidated some of their business from the 476 Amherst Street property to the Progress Avenue property, and they are in the process of conveying that property out. The use will be different than their current use. Currently, they make very small parts for antenna for airplanes, basically military application. They're very much in favor of the change. For those of you who are familiar with that part of Amherst Street, the property immediately contiguous to 476, as you look at it from Amherst Street, is a car dealership. And immediately to the left is a mixed use, I would call it a mixed commercial retail use. The front parcel, the Fabraze parcel, which is the one that's improved, is immediately contiguous to the rear parcel owned by Microwave Development Labs, as I said, a sister corporation. That is an unimproved parcel. It's still heavily wooded. and it runs from the rear of the Fabry's parcel back to the railroad tracks. My understanding is that the prospective purchaser would be doing some improvement there, not any planned building, but to clear that back lot. The front use would be a more commercial use. And as I've spoken with Ms. Marchand earlier, the intention was prior to receiving this very glad news, was that they would be going through the variance process. If they do not need to do that and need a conditional use permit, that certainly would be in everyone's best interest as far as 476 is concerned. And again, looking at the length of the street or the immediate area, the owners of the corporation are the same folks from 70 years ago, and they will tell you that obviously the development of Amherst Street has been quite dramatic over the years, and the change from AI to PI at this stage would be a further step in the progress of the street, as prior council mentioned. So we are 100% in support, and if there's anything that we can provide to any of the members or to you, Madam, or to Mr. Mayor, we would be glad to do that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Seeing none, testimony in opposition? Seeing none, testimony in favor? Testimony in opposition? None. Okay, I'll now take testimony in favor of amending the Airport Approach Zone Overlay District Ordinance 18027. Is there anyone who would like to give testimony in favor of that ordinance?
For the record, against Madam Chairman, members of the board, my name is Gerald Prunier. I'm an attorney with offices at 20 Trafalgar Square here in Nashua. And I am in favor of the airport ordinance as far as changing the heights and the area of it. What I am somewhat opposed to, is the fact that they're trying to implement some sound requirements on any new construction in that area. This is additional cost to anybody that wants to develop their property in that area. Anyone that wants to build in that area knows there's an airport. It's kind of open, it's there, it's whatever it is. And if they want to put more sound construction in, that's fine, but that should be up to them. It should not be up to putting an ordinance that makes them comply with that, because that may put them over for the cost and they may not go. So I think that, it's very simple. That the airport's there. If you want to go there, you accept everything that goes with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor? Seeing none. In opposition? And Mr. Prunier, I've noted your concern.
I'm for and then against.
Right, and I noted it in both places.
A little bit more time, I can decide.
Thank you. And once again, testimony in favor and testimony in opposition. I see none. So the public hearing is closed at 7:13 p.m. Thank you. Okay. I'm now going to call to order a meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee at 7:14 in the chamber, and if the clerk would call the roll, please.
Alderman Jettie,
Here.
Alderman Tenza, Alderman Michael Laws, Alderman Schmidt is here, and our chair, Melissa Golia.
Who's Mike Laws?
I'm sorry?
It's my dad at school. He's always with me in spirit.
Oh, excuse me. Also in attendance, Alderman Lopez, Alderman Klee, Alderman Dowd, Alderman Kelly, Alderman McCarthy, or Alderwoman Kelly, I'm sorry, and Alderman McCarthy and the mayor. And we also have with us Director Photo. And is Director Marchant there? Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't want to not include you. So is there anyone who wishes to give public comment at this time? And if so, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good evening, Mayor Donchas. My name is Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Weiner Bennett, 111 Concord Street here in Nashua. And I'm here representing Springs One LLC, who have before you tonight a petition for waiver of the school impact fees, about the middle of the first page of your agenda. I'll just speak very briefly. We submitted the petition on behalf of Springs One LLC, which is developing a 62 and older community on West Hollis Street, 31 units. It's in the process of the commencement of development. Site work's been done to some degree. Construction of the buildings has commenced. You have in your codes a school impact fee that applies to the development of residential real estate. However, there's a waiver process that exists when the development won't likely generate the need for capital expenditures for school improvements. In this kind of case, a 62 and older community, which is governed by both the land use code, state and federal law, only persons 62 of age or older may live in there. So school-age children won't be living in the community. Therefore, it won't generate a need for capital improvements for the school system, hence the request for the waiver. I've detailed it a little further in the petition, which you've all had. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we certainly respectfully request that a favorable recommendation be given to the full Board of Aldermen. The Planning Board also has to take up and recommend on this application as well. I'm not certain whether it's been set for a Planning Board
Yes.
meeting yet, but we haven't appeared before the Board to discuss it. Just lastly, Madam Chair,
Yes.
this committee has heard similar petitions on 55 and older communities before, and I think uniformly favorably recommended the granting of those. This is an even simpler case because in a 62-plus community, you must be 62 to live there, whereas there are certain exceptions and a little bit of flexibility in the 55-plus communities.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to participate in public comment? Okay, seeing none. Communications.
There are none.
And the first item on our agenda this evening is a discussion regarding the Mohawk Tannery. And Director Photo, I don't know if you would like to just do a brief introduction and. I think the mayor plans to do that. Okay. Just a brief introduction
Yes,
of
well,
how we got to where we are. And
Sanborn Head is going to come forward,
if you-
and
you may sit right there. Please, thank you.
so the way, would you like me to?
Yes, please.
The way we got to where we are is that following several discussions between the EPA and the Board of Aldermen and the neighborhood, I held a neighborhood meeting over at Amherst Street School to get input from people who live in the vicinity of the Mohawk Tannery. And one of the recommendations, thoughts, requests that came out of that meeting, and a number of you did attend, was that the city engage an engineer to review the EPA conclusions. We, and this really Director Photo has a relationship with Sanborn Head as a result of the fact that they do a lot of work at the landfill. And they had also, Sanborn Head had also done previous work at this site some years ago, so they are familiar with it. And they have reviewed the EPA conclusions and have some thoughts and a critique of the EPA's work. And therefore, and I think you will find that their input is valuable. So we've asked that the presentation be made here to the Planning Committee so that you can get the details and that any member of the public who's interested can learn of the critique as well.
Okay, thank you. Eric, do you have something that's loaded on here already? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it had switched. If you would just like to state your name and so we have it for the record.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My name is Eric Steinhauser. I'm a principal with Sam Morton Head and Associates. We're based out of Concord, New Hampshire. Just to introduce myself, I'm the lead principal for much of the work that our firm does with the city at the landfill. We've also been involved with some other projects, such as the Broad Street Parkway, specifically with the asbestos removal and disposal area designs. And we've done some other small things with the landfill gas plant that's at the landfill, as well as we did a small project with the wastewater treatment plant on a transformer spill that there was there. So I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you tonight, and as I go through the presentation, if you have questions, please ask as I go along. I would find that helpful if you have a question. So what we were asked to do is look at the costs and the design alternatives that were in the July 2018 Engineering Evaluation and Cost Analysis Amendment, also known as an ECA amendment. And I wanted to just kind of calibrate and then walk you through what we did. So the Mohawk Tannery site, as you well know, is a number of sludge lagoons, and back in 2002, there was another ECA, the original ECA, and it looked at 3 alternatives for remediating that. And all 3 dealt with excavating all that sludge out and moving it somewhere, either on-site in a new designed landfill or off-site to another landfill, which the hope was it would be a non-hazardous landfill. And then the other one was to move it off-site, incinerate it, and then dispose of it. Of those 3, the off-site disposal as a non-hazardous waste was the preferred alternative at that time. There are a couple of other, oh, there we go, a couple of other areas on the general site that are, I believe, of question. The Fimble landfill, which was also used for tannery sludge, which is located here. And there's the asbestos disposal area that was formalized during the Broad Street Parkway project. Just want to make sure everyone understands that the costs for dealing with the environmental issues at the last 2 sites, the Fimble site and the asbestos disposal area, are not included in the costs that are in the ECA. All those sites may have been mentioned, but the costs for cleanup are not in there. So, as the mayor had mentioned, there's been a lot of work done at this site. We did some work back in 2005 and more recently in 2013. But this site's been well studied over many years. This is just some of the relevant material that is available specifically to the lagoons. There's other studies for the south parcel and for the building areas as well. So the ECA back in 2002, as I mentioned, was just those 3 alternatives. And the preferred alternative, like I said, was an off-site disposal at a non-hazardous landfill. And in 2002 dollars, they estimated that cost at $15 million. Again, did not include Fimble or the asbestos disposal area, in part because, well, the asbestos disposal area wasn't there yet. That's more recent. The 2018 document was an amendment to the 2002 document. So the idea was that they were going to reevaluate the initial costs. And they also looked at 2 additional alternatives. So if we had 3 in the first one, the next they added alternative 4 and 5. So alternative 1 would be the removal of all the Mohawk Tannery sludge to a non-hazardous disposal area. And in their calculation, we went from $15 million to just, over $30 million. Yes.
Does this include the Fimble?
No, I was going to
Does not.
remind you about that.
Thank
So all these ECA costs do not include Fimble or asbestos landfill. The alternative 4, simply, well, not so simply, was to, again, just the Mohawk sludge lagoons, was to combine them and solidify them so that they could be stabilized, and that was a cost of $19 million. And alternative 5 actually had 3 options to it, to encapsulate it with different types of perimeter controls and then have a cap system on top of it. Depending on the perimeter control, the costs range from $8 to $14 million. And the results of that ECA was that the middle ground alternative would be the preferred option. Now, yes, sir.
What is solidification and stabilization? How is that different than the encapsulation and capping?
So the idea of the solidification stabilization, that you would chemically treat the sludges with a mixture, and with large machinery, you would mix like you're making batter, mix chemicals into the sludge to bind all the contaminants together so they don't leach out, and make it another form. So it's not the sludge; it's an admixtured. You're adding a mixture to it so that you bind up all the contaminant or the other chemicals in that waste.
And you do that right there.
Yep, you get some very big machines with screw augers, and you have a recipe to put chemicals in there to make that happen. And I was going to talk a little bit about the specifics behind that, but I wanted to get to that in a couple slides, if that's okay. So again, these do not include fimble or asbestos. So this is right out of the EPA guidance document when you do remedial design and feasibility studies. And the point of the graph is that on the left side is when you're starting your review of a site, and the very right side is basically when you're done with the project. And the top and bottom lines are the cost variance. So basically, as you gain more information about the site, your reliability or certainty in your costs are improved. And where we are right now in an ECA review is possibly at a minus 30% plus 50% cost variation, which is appropriate. So we're doing an ECA, but it's a very similar process to what this document talks about. We have information that we have an idea of what we want to do. So the costs that were provided in the ECAs, when you're looking at the different alternatives, are really relative costs. If I have alternative A, it costs X, alternative B costs Y, and alternative C costs Z, you can decide based on cost what application makes the most sense. Doesn't mean that that's the cost it's going to cost you. It's just a relative cost to it. What usually happens is you need to get more data. You can refine your costs. What the graph doesn't show is that sometimes your costs go up. As you get more data, you have more knowns, you find out more information, and then you have to do more things. So you refine your design, your certainty and your cost estimate improves, but your costs also might go up. What I found when I was reviewing the documents was, in some instances, there were contingencies applied to the costing. And in some cases, the contingencies were clear. Sometimes they weren't. But typically, at a project at this level, you can look at applying contingencies in different ways. You can apply a contingency to the bottom line, and they did like a 10% or 7.5% contingency to the total cost. Or you can look at groups of items. So I have an excavation item, or I have the capping item, and I can look at those line items individually or in whole and apply the uncertainty contingency to that. What we're looking at here is, do I really know how certain am I at what volume am I taking out? If I'm doing a perimeter berm, am I certain about the length and the depth that barrier has to go? So you apply the contingency based on quantities, based on knowns and unknowns, and you're applying the contingencies based on how certain you might be for the actual cost. And you would come out with contingencies as you're going through the project. So as you're getting more design information, as you go through the process, you can adjust those contingencies as you get more knowns. So that was where I was trying to go with the, when you're doing like a solidification project, at the very early stages, yes, it is an alternative, and there's a possibility of doing it, but we don't know the design mixture very well. yet, or how to implement it from a bench scale to a full scale, those costs could go up.
Alderman Lopez.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to observe, so based on the contingencies that you're talking about, and knowing the volume is obviously key for figuring out either how you're going to treat it or how you're going to remove it, the one thing that is known from their more recent study is it was much more liquid back in 2002, and now it's solidified. How does that impact your overall costs and contingency needs?
Sure. So, for example, if you were doing the excavation, what the DES, the Department of Environmental Services, would look at is we have to clean close or clean out all that. So it's not just the sludge, it's whatever contaminated soil is there. And I didn't look at every single piece of environmental data to fully understand, but I would be pretty sure that we don't know exactly how deep any of the contamination would go in the underlying soils. Is it 6 inches? Is it a foot? Is it 2 feet? So if you're saying that the material's already come out, the underlying soils would have some impact to it. And we don't know to what degree we would have to remove that soil, which is a cost that probably isn't in the ECA fully. And is that material also non-hazardous or hazardous? Depending on what the classification of that material is, your disposal costs can, one of the estimates was you can have a 40% increase in just your disposal costs if you were going to a hazardous landfill. So while we know we might have a good handle on the volume of the sludge that was there, we don't necessarily have a good handle on the soil that would also need to be removed with it.
Alderman Lopez, please.
Just to clarify, what's not known is the exact depth of contamination, but that's not necessarily, it doesn't impact both sides of this equally. If we look at it in terms of one of them is cost of removal and the other one is cost of leaving pollutants there, there may be contaminated soil, but the deeper you go, the less likely it is to actually impact the surrounding neighborhoods or seep into groundwater or that kind of stuff, versus it will definitely cost more to dig down and figure all that out.
When you do a removal, you will be required to get to some level of clean. What that actual level is, I don't know. That hasn't been figured out. But how much you would have to remove to get to that is one of the bigger unknowns. And so also, as you dig deeper, it's more expensive to dig that stuff out and get it out of the ground, so your costs could go up.
I was intending to compare this to the encapsulation method, though, where you still need to make sure you're encapsulating all of it, but it's easier to encapsulate it, even if you don't know exactly how deep it is, than it is to dig it up if you don't know how deep it is.
Right. So so part of on this curve, as you would go to remedial design, there would be some more, in the alternatives 4 and 5 do capture pre-design efforts. So you would do some more site work, knowing where you're going. So so the idea of the ECA is you would pick the preferred alternative, and then you start diving in design efforts to design that alternative. So if we were doing the perimeter, the encapsulation, so now we know what we want to do, we would find the specific data so we could design that properly. So we'd want to know where the bottom of the sludge is, and then the barrier wall would be some depth below that based on the hydrogeology that would be there. So yes, we wouldn't have to know exactly how deep everything is, but we want to make sure that we have a certain confidence level about where it is, and then we would build that wall to a depth that's protective.
And, I mean, it seems logical that testing sites along a perimeter would be much more cost-effective than trying to fully understand the depth of an entire surface area.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, wrong way. There we go. So I wanted to talk specifically about each of the alternatives and some of the costing concerns and as they relate to design. So the 2008 ECA, when the consultant looked at that, they took the 2002 cost estimate, which was pretty detailed, And the 2002 estimate was based on data from, costing data from 1998 and I think 2000. So they, in the 2002 data, they took the older cost data and increased it by the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The 2018 document took the same approach. So except for select items, they just brought the costs 16 years forward for many items. And that's a concern of mine because the actual costs for different things may not increase exactly at the CPI. They may increase higher and they may increase lower. So that's a concern. The other thing is they, in the document, had a calculation for what that CPI multiplier would be, and that was a 95.91% increase. Well, the factor they used in the math was a 95.1%. So it's a little bit off, but an off on the low side so that the cost, I think, would be actually higher than what's proposed. Now, there were some line items that were identified where they changed the quantities or they actually changed the unit rates for them based on more recent data. And those were not increased by the CPI. They were more of the 2018 values. The one concern that was brought out in 2002 and 2018, and I think still remains, was the material that we would be removing, is it hazardous or non-hazardous? And what that really affects is where you can dispose of it. So if you're going to take it to an off-site disposal area, if it's hazardous, you're limited on places you can take that. At the time of 2002 document, there was a hazardous waste landfill in what's called Model City, New York, that is no longer an acceptable place. It's a closed landfill. So there's either you go into Canada or probably somewhere out in Ohio. So already your transportation costs have increased beyond what would have been back when they were originally thinking of this. So the idea is you would hope if you're going to do this that the material would be non-hazardous, but this wouldn't be a material you would want to put into your in your city landfill. You'd be eating up a lot of your city resource based on the volumes you would put in there. And then the next closest one would be the waste management landfill in Rochester. I don't know if they would take the material. They have, by permit, requirements for what kinds of sludges they can take. There would be a full testing protocol. We've had other projects where they reject material because it doesn't meet their acceptance criteria. So I don't know if this would make that or not, but that's where we talk about contingencies in the estimate. You need to have a contingency if you can't take it where you think you're going to take it. So that would be a larger contingency, perhaps, than the area that we would have to cover contingency.
Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the inflation costs. The CPI is generally a index that reflects the cost of manufactured goods, and over time basically takes into account increased efficiencies and scale, et cetera. Almost all of the cost, as I understand it at least, is labor and transportation in this project. It seems to me the CPI could be wildly off over the course of 18 years of very low inflation and increased manufacturing efficiency. Do we have a good number for what, and the fuel costs for transportation to Ohio certainly have not kept pace with the CPI over that period of time. So do we have a good number for what the real inflation factor ought to be?
No, I don't have that. When we do our estimates, we usually use data from recent published construction cost estimating data, or DOT published values for what they use for their projects, or similar projects that are done elsewhere in the state or nearby that we have access to. So we're trying to bring everything into as recent of a dollar value as we can, so it reflects real things. Whether the CPI is high or low, I don't know. I just know it's going to be off, and especially if you're going 16 years out, was the concern I had mostly.
The CPI over the past 5 to 10 years has been well under 3%, but the inflation numbers we've carried in construction are 5+ in general, and that number isn't disappointing most of the time. So, I mean, do we at least have calculations where we've recalculated the costs?
I didn't do any recalculating of costs. That wasn't part of my scope to do that.
I guess I'm
That's-
asking, did you see that in the numbers you were working with, where someone had gone back and looked at current excavation and transportation costs and reapplied that?
The alternative 4 and 5 had some excavation type costs in it, but they were a little bit different parameters to look at. But I didn't and it wasn't an apples to apples comparison. You know, they grouped more things together than the other one did, so it's hard for me to say that to compare the two if they're exactly the same. But I would, based on some other construction projects that I've seen, depending on the size of the projects and how busy contractors are, we get some pretty good price fluctuations. We had a bid not too long ago for another client. 8 people were interested in the bid, only 2 submitted, and the costs were much higher than were planned based on, because of the economics. Everyone's right now pretty busy. If the economy was the other way, people would be buying work to keep people busy. So, you know, there's this fluctuation. One of the reasons that, you know, there's contingencies in things, you might be in one spot in the economy and it changes, and your costs can go way up because they already got booked for the next year. So as I continue, the last 2 bullets kind of tied together here. Again, Fimble landfill and asbestos disposal areas are not included in the costs. And so when I look at, by applying the same kind of factors they had in the 2018 ECA for just excavating a sludge area and consolidating it, for the Fimble site, which is a 19,000 cubic yard move, and then you try to estimate what it would cost to move to asbestos, I think you're looking at least $50 million based on the, you know, parameters that the ECA was done in. The asbestos, to move asbestos is not an insignificant undertaking. There are few asbestos-approved contractors in the state, so they have a market that they can kind of set their costs, if you will. The work is very regulated. When we have folks on asbestos projects, they have to be asbestos certified workers. They go through special training. They have to wear special health and safety gear. So the guys and gals that are out there doing the construction, there's a lot of monitoring for air because asbestos is a friable airborne contaminant. Everything is done in wet, so wet things are heavier. So heavier, it costs more money. When you're all suited up, you're not as efficient. So you can imagine, you know, digging a yard of clean soil versus digging a yard of asbestos. The costs are tremendously different. I don't have an actual dollar value for the asbestos disposal area. I don't know how much material is there, how far we have to move it, and those costs for asbestos work could be quite variable. So that's why I think it's, you know, we're looking at some much larger number than at least the 30 million, and my guesstimate was, you know, 50 million plus, considering those 2 sites. There we go. I don't think I'm pushing the button hard enough. Alternative, I have 2, but it's really number 4, is the solidification. The cost estimates gave very detailed line by line line items. So, you know, excavate or haul or this material and that material. And they came up with direct costs, and then they had another table at the bottom where they had all their indirect costs. That table was missing from alternative 4. So I don't know what kind of contingencies they added to that, but they had, you know, a larger number of, what was that number? Of that was the 18 or 19 million. There, 19 million. So I don't know how they actually got from their base cost to their $19 million cost. That wasn't provided. But it is, as we talked a little bit before, to stabilize the material, there really needs to be more studies done to make sure you have the right mix, the right chemistry, or the right recipe, if you will, to solidify that material. So there's lab studies, there's bench scale studies, and then there's, studies as you're doing the work, and then you're going to possibly find that it's deeper. So I need more batter for the mix to get this to work. So there's an uncertainty there that really needs to be figured out before you really have a good cost. The process of doing the stabilization was noted in the documents to produce gas. As they're doing the mixing, they might release some gases, so there have to be some controls on that. Even after it's done, after it's stabilized, they want a cap system with a gas layer in that. The purpose of the document was to come up with approximate costs, and the appropriateness of the cap design, I question. I'm not sure how well thought through that was. It's just some gravel, fingers, it appears, and a very thin membrane in between soil. From doing nearly 30 years of landfill work where we put impermeable layers over our waste, we have drainage materials that are needed so we can get the water off the site, so we don't saturate the soil that you could have a failure. Now, we're not talking about very high slopes here, but in the cap design, there's no relief for infiltration above that impermeable layer. You would pond water. It could cause some other side issues. So I had some concerns about how much detailed design was done at this point. Because there probably needs to be another geosynthetic or drainage layer included, there's another cost that has to be incorporated into here. So that might be a lower cost. So again, applications of contingencies, because we don't know what we don't know. And the things that we do know, we're not certain of. There's no application of cost certainty to a degree I think we would want to see. And again, Fimble landfill and asbestos disposal, those costs were not included. So from the 19 million, again, guesstimating, moving the Fimble will bring you around 20 to 25 million. You add the asbestos disposal area, don't know. We're talking about a cost I can't quantify at this time. There we go. Alternative 3, which was the preferred alternative, actually that's alternative 5, sorry. That's a perimeter barrier. There's 3 different options. And then a cap system on top. Again, the cap system described in concept, and then the cap system described in more detail in the document, didn't quite match up. And without getting granular into the design, that feature would need to be designed appropriately for reasons I mentioned before. You want that cap to be stable in dry and in wet times. Well, they had features on there that made sense, but the actual design components might have to be somewhat different. Because you're on a sludge, so when any engineer hears sludge, they're thinking of a soft material. So to put a weight of a cap and 2 feet of material, weighing about 120 pounds per cubic foot is not a small load. You'll have to put some kind of stabilizing material in there, which they account for, but again, hasn't been designed, and it might have to be more robust than we know, because again, how thick is that sludge? When you put a weight on that, you're going to consolidate it, and you need to account for that settlement so that you don't have a bowl, and then we end up with a lake in the middle of our lagoon. So we have to, there's an iterative procedure to do that. So the cap design really needs to be thought through and might be more costly than what they just assume as a typical cross-section across the thing. There might be some different material types or additional features in there to make the cap work. It's been done before, it can be done again, but again, there's a cost to doing things right. The 3 options for the perimeter barrier was a sheet pile wall, a slurry wall, and a secant wall. The slurry wall was discounted. And a slurry wall basically is you dig a trench with a backhoe, and as you dig the trench, you're filling it with a slurry, which is clean water with a clay material called bentonite, which stays in suspension and holds the walls of the trench open as you get to your depth, and then you backfill it with a low permeability or very tight clay soil or concrete to form your wall. Buildings in downtown Boston are built with concrete slurry walls. Many landfills and hazardous waste sites are ringed with soil, clay slurry walls. Very common thing to do. But again, you need to know how deep you have to go. And it's not a very clean process. You're mixing these slurries and clays so you can get them in the hole. And they had proposed H-beams, steel girder type material in the wall, which I hadn't seen before, I guess to add strength. But that was discounted as the most costly, and I would agree with that for this project. The barrier wall with the sheet pile is probably the cleanest, maybe most efficient, where you're just putting sheets of metal or plastic to a certain depth, and you lock them together. They can be grouted. It's pretty common, and it's pretty fast, and that was the cheapest alternative. But that was discounted based on, if I understand correctly, the joining of the sheet piles together. They're about 4 foot wide, corrugated. You've probably seen them along the highways. And at the joints, they're specially made so they can wrap around each other, and then you can grout that. And there's other technologies for making that seal. They're used pretty commonly.
Why was that discounted?
The longevity of the steel, perhaps, and the joint, how well you can get that joint to seal. That was the concern.
What are your personal feelings on that?
I like the sheet wall, pile wall better. Not just because of cost, but it's an easier, we can design that well, because we can, as this gentleman said before, we can understand the perimeter, because we would put this not in the sludge, but outside the sludge in the soil, and drive those things, or sometimes you have to pre-drive them so you can get the clean cut. Contractors are very good nowadays with the keeping them in, I don't want to say parallel, but keeping them plumb and getting those joints right on. The technology gets better and better all the time. There are walls that are made out of plastic sheets, high-density polyethylene, same material we use for landfill liners and covers, but much, much thicker. And they actually drive those with a mandrel, so they go in the ground. You think plastic will flop around, but there's a mandrel that drives it, and you leave a thick chunk of plastic that can be that also slides together with a joint, which would have a different longevity than the steel. Yes.
Seems to me the plastic would be more permanent than concrete, right? The secant walls? And probably more impermeable, forgive me?
That would be my thought, yes. Yep.
And also cheaper?
Yes.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
So the secant wall is another mixing, not as to the same scale as the solidification, but you're building a perimeter wall where you would overlap these columns, if you will, to make the perimeter. And again, you'd have to have that chemistry, that recipe, such that it locks up the contaminant, that it won't flow through. There's been some studies about what that mixture could be in a lab scale. From what I understand from the reading of the reports, there's some off-gassing, and there's some possible leaching during construction and possibly after. So, yeah, there's some other issues that would need to be figured out. And again, the application of contingencies to these unknowns is one of the big concerns I had, is not just put a contingency at the bottom, but each item or group of items needs to be thought, how sure are we about cost on that? So the other thing is they did an estimate, again, for the applicability of what they were looking at to compare one alternative to another. How much barrier wall do you really need? So is it, they figured 22 foot depth? Is it 20 foot 2-foot depth, a good estimate for, it might be 2 feet, it might be 50 feet, and overall it's 22. There needs to be more understanding of what that is. So that's, to me, another area of potential uncertainty. In some walls, where it's bedrock, I think it's pretty deep in most of the area, so it wouldn't be an issue. We're looking to tie this in either to a tighter, less permeable natural material below there, there's some till, or deep enough such that the contaminant flow won't go to the river. So there's the two design criteria that we'd have to look at. Is 22 feet the right, as an average, the right depth? I don't know. That more study would need to be done. So that's, again, an unknown and a contingency issue. And just like the other two, and I just like to hammer it home, costs don't include FIMBL and asbestos. Again, I say assuming sheet pile, I'm sorry.
I just have one quick question. When you talked about the slurry and the secant, if I remember correctly, I thought they talked about a secant with a semi-slurry in there, and that the negative about the slurry was being too close to the river, the possibility of it kind of falling into itself.
Yeah, and
So-
again, I didn't look at I was looking more at the cost, and that's in some of the applicability. So depending on exactly where it is and how close to the river and how good the slurry is and how good this, yeah, a lot of unknowns. You probably have more control on a secant because your area of disturbance at any one time is smaller, so you wouldn't have that chance of a large area open to cave in. The sheet pile wall, you don't have anything open. You're just pushing it right down. If there was a hard rocky layer in the upper couple feet, they might remove that so they can get a better push on the sheet pile, but we're not opening up a lot of area. So all these construction methods have pros and cons. And again, the application of the applicability ties into contingencies and how you would work that.
Would it be ridiculous to use the more effective method in the area where it might potentially cause the most damage if there were a leak, and then use the cheaper method in the area where it's not that much of a concern? Can you do
A hybrid?
Yeah,
type-
hybrid.
You could always do a hybrid.
happen?
It can, and often does because it makes sense. And when you go to hybrid approaches, now you're having two technologies, and you lose economies of scale. So where you may have got a reasonable price for a mile, now I'm going down to a half mile, your costs are going to go up.
Sure.
So there's yes, you can do that, and it's oftentimes done where you need to do that, but if you can select one application and one technology to apply, it makes the most cost sense, but it doesn't always make the technical sense.
Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't-
Eric, on the cost, on the FIMBL, have you reached the bottom yet? If you,
Of the concerns, then I had conclusions and recommendations, but go ahead and ask.
well, if you haven't gotten to this yet, then I apologize and just wait. But you say that the FIMBL cleanup is not included. So in order to arrive at the actual cost, you would what, need the cost of moving the material from FIMBL onto the Mohawk Tannery Lagoon?
Yes, that's correct.
And what about the cost of the retaining wall that would hold the FIMBL waste on top of the, or next to the
Right.
FIMBL, excuse me, would hold the FIMBL waste next to the Mohawk Lagoon? Is that included in the cost?
No. So nothing to deal with moving FIMBL or asbestos were included in any of these costs. So when I project these greater than number, I'm just trying to be conservative on the low side that it could be this or greater, because when you talk about moving the material and then how do we get it on there and how do we keep it there, because it is a soft material, we'll have to build a perimeter berm. I didn't cost out all of those items because, again, I don't know how much area, how tall, and what that berm needs to be made out of, how we would access it. There's a lot of things that go into the costing. So the low end of the encapsulation cost was, I think, 8 million. And so, again, moving Fimble and everything we'd have to do with that, we're looking around 15 million. You add the asbestos, we're getting higher than that. There's cost to doing this right, and I'm sure if the city wants to have this project done, you want it done right so it's safe and it's appropriate. But what that would do to the grade changes, we haven't studied that, and there's nothing in the documents that show, other than move A to this area and it would be about this big. There's nothing that shows what that landform would look like or what the design components would look like in a profile or elevation view. So I don't know what changes to the site things would look like just for the remediation type of work. All right, I have just 2 more slides. So I just wanted to go through just conclude what I was talking about. Costs are uncertain, especially at this level of design. Again, we're way on the left side of the designing. What we're looking at, and we're looking at relative costs, not what I would consider, let's go bond this project, we're ready for construction. Again, costs for Fimble and asbestos disposal area are not included. The revised alternative 1 costs are based on, I'm sorry, we should revise the costs for alternative 1 based on current industry pricing, not use just the CPI multiplier. Really look at what you can, what we would be able to build it today would be a better refined number and more appropriate. To really get us to a place where we understand what the cost would be, additional studies and engineering are needed to improve that certainty. We talked about, figuring out how deep that perimeter berm would need to be, or how much actual volume would have to be, what would the landform. We'd have to do some engineering to figure out what things would look like. As we're doing our costs, we should apply appropriate contingency to individual or groups of line items based on what we know of today's economy and the knowns and unknowns that are there. And the one thing I didn't talk about was post-construction costs, or what we say in the landfill business, post-closure, when the facility is closed or done. Unless you're taking everything out and there's nothing left, then you're going to have to monitor the site. And in the non-hazardous landfill world, where there's a 30-year post-closure program, and Ms. Foto can talk about this, that's a 30-year rolling time. That 30-year never ends. You're budgeted for 30 years, and you're always keeping that 30 years out in front of you. So there's a post-construction cost, whether you're doing stabilization or encapsulation, where you're going to have to do some kind of site monitoring to make sure that the fix is working. Now, that cost might go down over time because we would have proved that everything is locked and it's not leaking and everything's fine, and you might be able to reduce that, but there's still a cost that you or whoever's responsible for the environmental liability of the site will have in perpetuity. Yes.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment about the post-testing, and without getting too political or antsy here, I've spoken to Representative Rosenwald about this issue. When we talked to EPA and I asked them, will you be continue monitoring? And they said that they would probably turn it over to DES. And with the way that the state, and as an alderman and a state rep, I was concerned that if we put this in their budget, so to speak, the way that they keep pulling money away and promises not necessarily kept, I just fear that anxiety, that's going to go on to the city and the town, and I'd like to keep that in mind, that when we do come up with this cost, that we realize that either it's got to be budgeted by whomever the landowner is, or that we know that eventually we're going to accept the cost of it. It is, especially if it's an ongoing rolling thing, I think that's going to end up in the city, and I have anxiety about that. So I just,
It's
without being too
factor.
political,
Yeah. The ECAs do have a post-construction estimate. I didn't follow all the logic through there, how they got to the numbers, but there is a cost, and it's something, for our landfills, They run, you guys put money away for that contingency and bank it, and so you have it for the future. Because you get money when you take the waste in, part of that goes to that fund. You don't have that here. You don't have you're not generating a dollar bank account to cover those costs in the future.
An estimate, what is the testing of that cost?
That'll depend on what we negotiate, or whoever's doing this work, who negotiates with the DES.
It's doing, I'm sorry, hold on.
One person per meeting here.
It won't stop. Sorry.
There you go. So there'll be a part of a negotiation with DES, how many wells, the frequency of the monitoring, and what actual tests they want done. So you could be doing one parameter once a year from each well. You could be doing a huge list of EPA chemistry 4 times a year. And we're seeing with DES, when the new contaminants of concern pop up, then they throw another contaminant at you. Because they're contaminants of concern, they're usually more expensive. And, you know, cities and our other private clients are facing that with the PFAS and PFOA things. So they have to budget more for that kind of stuff. And that was not something planned before.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, from all the briefings I've been at, it sounded like as this goes forward and they come up with a final plan, the EPA is going to make sure who's monitoring it going forward. And if it was the state, they're going to be overseen by EPA. And if they default, the EPA will come down on the state. And if neither one of those costs, it would probably fall on the developer because it's private land, it's not city land, and so we're not involved in any of the costs. So I don't see it falling back on the city. If the EPA is going to take control of this, and they turn it over to the state, I expect the federal government to oversee the state's responsibility to test.
I can't comment who's going to pay for what. I'm just telling you that there's a cost that's out there that needs to get covered.
Director Marchant, do you want to join us, or did you want to make a, photo, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to mention, once the EPA, once this project is complete, the EPA will turn it over to DES, the Department of Environmental Services. At that point, there'll have to be some decisions made on who's going to pay for the monitoring. DES has not committed to that cost, and also mowing of the cap. That'll be another cost associated with the monitoring. So it will have to be monitored for many years to come. So I think Alderman Clee has a valid concern. But that'll have to be determined.
Thank you. Darren, did you want to join us, or did you have any comments? I'm having a hard time seeing you, and I don't want to put pressure on you, but I didn't know if you had any comments. And if you would just state your name and who you're representing, and actually, if you would like to join us here, please. Yeah, any one of these. And just make sure the mic is close enough so it picks you up.
Does he
Thank
want to
you.
finish his last slide?
I got two more.
Oh, I'm
two more
sorry.
things.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Please, thank you.
And these will go quick because we've already kind of touched on these. So alternative designs should be considered for the proposed development. So I have not looked at any of the developers' plans. That wasn't part of my scope. And all as an engineer that works with these types of sites, the question we would have is, can we leave the Fimble where it is? It's a DES closed site. It's, as far as DES is concerned, that's done. The asbestos disposal areas are done. If they can be left alone and built over, there's ways to do that. Perhaps that would be an appropriate thing. That cost can stay out. And as we talked about before, there could be a hybrid approach to achieve the remedial and the development goals. I don't know what those are. Again, I haven't been involved in the development, but there could be something there. And as we were just speaking about who's responsible for the project, That wasn't addressed in the documents that I read, but there is a design cost, there's a construction cost, there's the post-construction cost, which whether it's monitoring or the maintenance of capped areas, and that's a long-term liability for the post-closure monitoring. That's going to go on, like I said, in perpetuity. So that's my presentation.
Alderman Dowd.
So, after having read that, it appears to me that there's like 4 points. Costs are uncertain because none of the designs are far enough along to have actual costs. So it looks like an approach has to be selected based on relative cost, one to the other. And once a approach is selected, then better design, you need a better design to get more detailed costs before a final decision is made. And then at that point, you make the final decision.
Correct.
Darren, would you?
Sure. Darren Santos with Geo Insight, Manchester, New Hampshire. I work with the developer Blaylock Holdings, Bernie Plant. Really was here to, address any questions that might have resulted out of the last Alderman meeting or out of tonight. I have a few notes here that I took as we went along. I think Sanborn head agrees that the encapsulation approach is the most appropriate, but I won't speak for you, Eric. Certainly from a cost perspective, it is. Geo Insight when our first involvement was to look at the solidification option, and we got fairly far along with a design on that, but the costs were really spiraling out of control, at least from the developer's perspective. So that's when we regrouped and went to the encapsulation. First thing we looked at was the plastic, the poly sheet piles, but in all honesty, we couldn't find a contractor willing to even put them in because of their experience in New England with them. They tend to, there's a male and a female end, and they go together, and it gets driven down. If any, it's not particularly rocky soil, but any hardness in the soil can cause, even with the mandrel, that to rip the sheet pile out like a zipper, like, when your zipper breaks on your coat. Then you have to pull out the subsequent section, reset it, put the other one in that just ripped out, and it causes the construction costs to go up. So the sheet pile, steel pile, we looked at and we liked. The longevity was really an issue there. It is going to be close to the sludge. We had our sheet pile contractor passed along some chemical information to the steel folks, and they were worried about increased corrosion of that. So that's how we came to I've talked about the secant and the slurry wall last meeting, and that's our preferred alternative, but I think, the sheet pile is certainly something, we'd still look at if there was a strong push for that.
Madam Chair.
Question, yes, Mayor Donchis.
Eric, and either or both of you could react to this. Eric, you made the statement that the Fimble waste is, from the current point of view of DES, a closed site. And you mentioned that the asbestos had already been moved and closed, and you suggested that there could be some building on top. Now, my understanding is that you could possibly build a road over the asbestos, but not a building. Is that correct or incorrect? And what type of structure, if anything, could you build over the Fimble waste location if you wanted to build on top of it?
Sure. The asbestos, you can definitely build a parking lot or a road. It's possible to do a building. It's a little more tricky construction. The foundations would have to be founded below the disposal area, and other precautions would need to be taken, but it's possible, but likely not a preferred thing to do. For the sludge, the Fimble sludge area, I wouldn't suggest building any structure on top of that. There's no way to really found it appropriately, because you don't want to, even if we cap, whatever cap is there, you could put something lightly loaded, but nothing that's going to penetrate through the cap. And you'd be
Could you
into
put
the-
parking on top of there or something like that?
Uh,
I assume
I-
no, but
I need to
just-
say I don't know, because I don't know the strength of that material and what kind of loading we would put on it, but I would venture to say likely not. That might be more of an open area use. Many of the sludge lagoons that I've closed, we've used as more of a nature, turn it back to nature, where they become either shallow ponds or just open vegetated areas, but not for an active use.
You think that's correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. When we looked at the solidification option, mixing the cement into the sludge, the solidification was going to occur at the Fimble landfill in place. So there would have been two cement monoliths, the Fimble landfill and the two lagoons. As we backed off that option, that would have allowed construction of at least parking lots over what is now the Fimble landfill. If the landfill's left as is, I don't see any engineer signing off on putting any structure on top of that. You could compromise it's underlined cap over it, could compromise either one of those.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Lopez?
I have a question. I think for some reason Alderman McCarthy might know, but if we can build a road over the asbestos, it was my impression we dug that up to make the parkway. So why didn't we just leave it there?
Alderman McCarthy?
I don't know exactly how the asbestos got there. I think that may have been capped as part of cleaning up the Fimble site when we moved material for the parkway, that it was just encapsulated on site.
There was already asbestos in that area, and I think that was one of the selected areas to do the consolidation, because there was already material there.
So it didn't come from the parkway, it was already there. And then we moved material in from the parkway onto it, or?
Yeah, there was material already there, and I believe there was 3 or 4 consolidation areas for the parkway. So wherever the construction was that needed to have material moved, and I don't know all the details, but that was one of the locations that it made sense to put. And I believe they left, I understand there may have been room for a road to go, because there's like 2 mounds, I believe. There was room for some kind of access between, but I don't know the details on that.
I mean, I feel like it's worth observing that if you can put it under a road, why not put it under the road off of the parkway?
Director Fada?
We did that. We left as much as we could, but there was too much of it, so we.
Well, I mean, the leftover, like, we're supposedly for this new development cutting a new thing into the parkway, so.
Oh, you mean for the new, yeah, that I can't speak to. I haven't seen either.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Oh, Alderman Kelly. Yes.
I guess I had a preconceived idea about what this report was going to be. I thought we had talked about possibly moving Fimble offsite, and I know that that's very costly, or possibly moving it to the Mohawk Tannery outside of the original lagoons. I remember this discussion on that, but all of this talks about Fimble is not included in any of this discussion. Is that correct?
Alderman McCarthy.
I think my recollection from what we had requested at the meetings was simply to get a peer review of the numbers that are in the ECA.
Okay.
So, I mean, it does not include that. If we want to look at removing the Fimble material, I think that's something that has to be done separately.
Okay, just my misunderstanding. Thank you.
I think
Alderman Lopez.
was kind of, I think, what I interpreted as the final suggestion where it said, Sanborn recommended making sure that it was your second to last slide, where basically you're saying, make sure we know what we're doing, make sure we have a plan, make sure that all of the elements are understood. And the development on the tannery seems like it's pretty linked to the Fimbledore one. So either we don't have to move the Fimble one, which knowing our luck, we do. And then more likely, if that becomes part of the plan, then that becomes part of the elements that we need to understand as the plan unfolds.
Any other comments,
Can
questions?
I ask a question
Yes.
of Darren Santos? Darren, so in your original idea, were you thinking of leaving the Fimble waste where it is, or were you thinking of moving it over to Mohawk? That's, given that it's considered a closed and, quote, clean landfill or disposal site at this point?
Well, it is. I mean, it's a stable landfill. It's doing its job. It's landlocked now, as the city took half the Thimble property. And I think it just speaks to the larger, I'm not a developer, but I do understand for development to work, it needs to produce money. So it's the greater, the three property development that comes into play. And the plan since the beginning has been try to consolidate all the waste down to that one area. So I think there's 40 acres for the three properties, and we're trying to bring it down to 2. The rest of the property, if the asbestos is all moved, the Fimble landfill is all moved, all the little satellite areas at Mohawk Tannery, the rest of the site would meet residential reuse standards, which is unrestricted reuse. And so that's our goal now. We had previous iterations where we looked at solidifying the Fimble landfill in place. We also looked at coming over and excavating to the north of the lagoons. We've since found that bedrock rises up there and it wouldn't be enough area. So we'd essentially create the lagoons and expand that for the Fimble waste.
Anything else? Anyone else? Alderman McCarthy, I saw your hand. Comments, questions, thoughts? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Aaron, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, we have one more presentation this evening. I asked Paul Shea, the Executive Director of Great America Downtown, to come in and just kind of give us an update. It's kind of mid-year from when we normally hear from Paul. And there's certainly been a lot going on and a lot being planned. So Paul, if you would like to join us, do you have anything you need to put up here? You're set? Okay, thanks.
Just a couple things here.
So I believe everyone knows Paul, and we've been enjoying the GAD events this year. So
Thank you very much for having me this evening. My name is Paul Shea. I'm the Executive Director for Great American Downtown. The city is a great partner in the programming that we have developed over the past decade and especially over the past few years. We've been working diligently to build up our programs. Most notably this year, we have expanded the Nashua Farmers Market and moved the location out to Main Street. And so that was my intention to focus on that this evening and talk about progress and perhaps a pathway for growth into next year. The Nashua Farmers Market is approximately 25 years old. It's existed at a number of different locations throughout the downtown area. Going back 4 years now, we began on a pathway for growth for the market. The market, for some time, had operated on the Main Street Bridge, and we had about 6 to 8 vendors on any given week at the market, operating on Sundays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Over the past few years, we have assumed the full management and coordination of the market. Previously, the arrangement for the market involved the Great American Downtown coordinating permitting and advertising, and the vendors would manage the market itself and the day-to-day operations. When I came on, we assumed management of the market in addition to the coordination role as a move toward that growth that we've been working on. We last year had roughly 32 vendors on any given week. So we grew from the bridge in the second year to the Pearson Avenue surface lot. We found that consumers are very finicky about crossing the road, which is a funny thing. It might be 75 feet that way. But when it involves mentally competing with traffic, people have a degree of hesitancy. Despite being out of the line of sight and around the corner, we found greater success with our market expansion area down Water Street near to Parc de Notre Renaissance. Française. And this past year, we really grew out of that area. This past year, we moved out to Main Street. It was rather ambitious. I've got to thank the Mayor and Economic Development and Jessica DePoint-Briand from Jaja Bells for really encouraging us to take the leap and get out to Main Street, and we've had a great deal of success with that. At the beginning of the season, we started with 40 vendors, but 8 of them were art vendors. When you produce events like this, scope and scale of the space in relation to how people move through it and the lines of sight and things are very important. So to ensure that the market was nice and full as an experience for someone coming for the first time, we invited artists to fill in some of the spaces at no cost. Over the course of the season, we've attracted 10 new vendors. And with that, we have completely filled up the space that we've been occupying on Sundays for the past 18 weeks. I have a number of comments from vendors that I could offer on feedback, but generally, we have had a great experience across the board. We've even had some new vendors that have come in, choose our market over the SOA market down in Boston, both because they do a good volume in sales, but because their business is located north of Nashua. And so for them, it's less travel, and they do just as good a business as they would do at a very popular market in the south end of Boston. Give me a moment, I'll pull up some points of feedback here. So I've got just a couple of quotes from our vendors. We have John Blake. He's the owner of DJ's Pure Natural Honey. He's one of the original vendors from way back at the market. Great guy. So John has said to us, he thinks everything's gone very well. We have more foot traffic. People have said that the advertising was great, and they hear people talking about the market in stores, barbershops, etc. Jamie, who's owner of Coffin Cellars Winery, they're a new vendor this year. So far, we've really enjoyed the market. Not only is there a lot of foot traffic, but most of the people coming through seem genuinely interested in supporting local businesses. Our sales have been great, and the general feeling from guests as well as vendors seems to be quite positive. William Dunkerley from Dunk's Mushrooms is also a new vendor joining us this season from the beginning. So he can say that things have gone well. He's selling more mushrooms than he expected. He had repeat customers on the second week through the season. Having never done a farmer's market before, he says it's all new to him, but overall he sees the whole operation seems well organized and orchestrated. Jump ahead, Nashua Telegraph editorial writes about the market. On Main Street, this event only will grow and become a destination for those looking for healthy, homegrown foods and other Nashua-centric offerings. Aside from the economic benefit, the more centralized location offers more convenient parking and handicapped accessibility. Shea and Great American Downtown deserve much praise for their efforts in making this move and for their work to grow the event. Jessica de Pontbriand, she writes facts. Sales have doubled from last year on Sundays in both of the shop and the market. Numbers for her have been better than the holiday stroll. The holiday stroll, for some perspective, she doesn't operate an outside operation. She just does capacity at her venue for the duration of the event. And she's finding a similar experience in the shop, but she's also got the added outdoor presence. And to kind of tie into that, she also writes, amazing way to advertise. Every store owner should have a booth. And we've had a handful of store owners, Cava Divino, Graffiti Paint Bar, and Elaine Olenson, who is part of the display of goods at Glorious Possibilities, have all been part of the market. Purple Finch Properties, and we hope to grow that as the popularity of the market continues to grow, and the potential value that some of our existing vendors experience from that is communicated, and people see the opportunity. Right now, we're working with the Nashua Arts Commission and the folks at City Arts Nashua and various organizations in the city who put on programming that has an artistic component to do an I'm trying to think, I guess you'd call it an off-year study with the Americans for the Arts. So this is a deep study into a broad variety of programs put on by a number of different organizations to determine overall economic impact of arts activities, where we host 2 performances at the farmers market each week. We've incorporated the data for the farmers market and economic impact. We'll have more in-depth information on that once the study is completed. I don't anticipate that will be until winter of next year, perhaps. Could be late fall. But considering ballpark of 600 people per week, $20 per person spent, you're looking at over $300,000 in economic impact over the course of the 18-week season. So we've been generating a lot of economic activity. We've been generating a lot of positive experiences, and to speak to the experience that the market provides, just moving to the middle of Main Street has changed the market's environment in a way that allows people to relax, spend more time chit-chatting with each other, and take in the art, or street piano, or take some sidewalk chalk with their kids, and kind of just enjoy the afternoon. So it's been a really pleasant experience, and I do really appreciate the support of everyone here as we've kind of set forth to build this up.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Alderman Jettie and then Alderman Lopez.
So, Paul, I don't pretend to be an expert on retail, or, I'm not in retail, I don't have a shop on Main Street, but it's always been a mystery to me why, when you have these events that attract people downtown, why there are so many shop owners who insist on remaining closed when you've got all those potential customers coming to Main Street. Is there any possibility that more shop owners that you'll be able to convince them to open when people are coming downtown?
I believe so. We have seen camaraderie have staff on site on Sundays when they wouldn't normally be open, and so that's a humble beginning. But I do believe that between businesses coming to set up and sell at the market, and additional businesses seeing the value for being open during the Sundays that the market is operating. I've received a note from Ruth Boland at New Hampshire League of Craftsmen indicating that she's had a good degree of interest in her shop as a result of events and programs that we put on. We've been seeing a lot of activity. There was initially some concerns that we might have negative impact on some businesses adjacent to the market where it's operating, but that hasn't come to fruition, which has been excellent. And I'd say the short answer is yes. I think over time we'll see, provided that we continue to produce this great event in the middle of the street and bring 800 to 1,000 people down each week, we're going to see more businesses recognize the opportunity.
Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, as someone who lives basically, a block away from Main Street, if that, I find it to be a great experience seeing it there on Sundays, even if I don't go every single Sunday to buy something. It's nice to go through it, kind of say hi to people. It's becoming really a community experience. During the earlier farmers market iterations, the Pearson lot, there was definitely, it was a factor that people had to cross, but I also think it was like trying to have a party in a bunker where it's all brick walls, it's all, concrete. So the environment needed to be a little bit more friendly and approachable. French Park definitely has that. It's, along the riverfront, it's a nice, well-kept park. There are some pretty fantastically done murals. Like the artists, it's just amazing. So I think that really made it more of a welcoming space. And then moving it downtown was the next part. What was missing at French Park were the tertiary activities, the other parties that were active at the same time. That gives people a real variety of activities. So to that end, having places like Martha's that are open, Jaja Bells, so people can go out and enjoy the farmers market experience, but that's not the only thing that they're doing there. It's multifaceted. I think that has contributed a lot. And then also there has been a lot done in that immediate area that has really improved, its usability. The city put the midpoint crosswalk in and the connecting sidewalk alongside another mural, which is pretty good, but it's not really, hasn't been colored in yet. And then the Main Street Methodist did a really nice frontal renovation. So it's like the nexus of a whole bunch of partnerships coming together where, the church put their work in because they really want to be an active and engaged member of the community. They refer to themselves as the heart of Nashua. The city was trying to make, more easily accessible parking. And then, you have companies like the Landing Company that are looking at, what do I do to make my site a little bit nicer, a little bit, more to augment it visually. So I think it's a great location for the farmers market. But I also think it's a good example for other areas in the city to say, we can liven up what we're doing and we can create economic activity centers just by making spaces more welcoming and transforming them, not with a huge big ticket project, but with a series of, partial projects and contributions. So I want to compliment Great American Downtown on bringing all of that together in that site and seeing the value of doing it because, the traffic definitely raised a lot of eyebrows when people found out we were going to have this thing popping up in the middle of Main Street. But out of that came a parking development or a traffic development plan, which is great. And it's a model for other events too, to run events like that without disrupting traffic unduly.
Alderman Dowd.
Another question. I just want to say thank you for you and your staff and everything for all the activities you put on throughout the year since I've lived in Nashua, which is probably a lot longer than you've been alive. I've never seen anyone that brought as much attention to downtown and let the people of Nashua know that there's a downtown to enjoy. So thank you.
Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. Paul, clearly the farmers market was a huge success this year, so congratulations to Gad for getting that up and running and on Main Street and making it success in a like Alderman Lopez says, a community space where people want to go and meet and enjoy each other's company. Great vendors. The one I wouldn't even say criticism I've heard, but concern from some of the folks who go to church down there. And it's not just about the farmers market, but lots of events that go on Sundays. Is that Sundays is their one day to come together? And I haven't heard that the farmers market is particularly has made it difficult for them to get downtown for either Church of the Good Shepherd or the Main Street Methodist Church, but that, everything is happening right in front of their church, right, their one time of the week that they come together to worship. So just moving forward as the farmer's market expands, hopefully they could be part of the conversation and, we can be, and I'm sure you will be, just respectful of their time and all the things that they do for the city as well.
Question, Alderman Clay.
Again, I have just a comment. I want to echo Alderman Dodd's words. I love the farmer's market, and it actually became more not just a place to go and buy the fruits and vegetables and other things. It was a way of meeting people too. I don't know how many times I was just walking down and I had someone flag me down that I actually hadn't seen in a while. So it was a social atmosphere as well as, the chance to buy goods that I'm not growing this year. So thank you.
Yeah, Alderman Laws.
I too would like to thank you, Paul. I think too often people look for the easy things to criticize about the city of Nashua, and you're one of those people who's out there constantly, consistently trying to make it look like a better place than it has. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. You do wonderful things to the city. I wish there were more people like you. You give people something to aspire to when it comes to loving the place that you're from. So thanks for that.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? I thought I saw a hand go up. Paul, I think that certainly our thanks to all of the members of GAD, because I know that they're all involved in their own special way to support what's happening downtown and everything that GAD puts its effort into in moving that forward. So to your members and to your staff, thank you. One of the things that I guess is a natural from the summer farmers market is the winter's farmers market, and it's been in the paper, and I know a couple of people have said to me, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. I know as much as you. So I guess, do we know when it's opening? And what's the plan?
Yes, we do. So the indoor market will open this Sunday. We will have.
I'm sorry, they'll open when, the Sunday you said?
We'll open this Sunday.
Okay.
So we will be in 201 Main Street on the lower level. We will have somewhere in the ballpark of 16 to 18 vendors. 18 will be our max, but I have one or two vendors that cannot make it for the first Sunday. So this will operate each Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., just in the lower retail frontage.
So, excuse me, so you're talking street level?
Yes.
Not actually lower level?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Street level.
Yes, the street level of the retail frontage at 201 Main Street. So it will be nicely filled in. We will have a variety of products available, honey, maple products, late season vegetables, things that can be grown in hoop houses, pickled goods, jams and jellies. We will have meat and eggs available, cold storage things like potatoes, things that have longer staying power. Tentatively, on November 18th, the hours of that market will expand to run from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we are hopeful to get final approvals for this expansion to a holiday gift market on the second level of retail there. So it's our hope that during the holiday season, with approximately 30 to 32 vendors on the second level and a total of nearly 50 vendors throughout, we will contribute to the critical mass of shopping opportunities downtown. So while folks are coming to visit this holiday gift market, we believe that they'll also be more likely than they would otherwise to stop in at brick and mortar retail throughout the downtown, and as well as stopping in for a bite to eat while they're out and about. So I'm hopeful that we'll have the details on that finalized by midweek next week and can make an announcement. We've already done initial outreach to prospective vendors to let them know that the opportunity is coming, so that they can be open and prepared as soon as the applications are released. And we're hopeful that we'll fully subscribe the space, and it will be, a really nice thing through the second half of November and into December.
Great. Someone who was familiar with earlier attempts to use that building asked me about fire code issues and occupancy and all of that. And
Yes.
I said, I'm sure that's been addressed. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. City departments have been working with us through the process to ensure that this program is successful, but also safe and up to all relevant codes. So the space has previous occupancy permitting for mercantile use. There were some light updates that needed to be done to get the space into occupancy standard, couple of fire extinguishers, light bulbs changed, things like that. And so the downstairs is all in conformance, and finalizing the timeline for the upstairs. The upstairs activation is something that we're waiting on, but we are absolutely working with city departments to ensure that this is safe, successful, and that in addition to that, we'll have staff on site to ensure that we don't exceed the capacity that's allowed. Though that capacity it's a fair size. I believe it's about 150 for the lower level. We don't have our final certificate, but it's going to be tough to exceed that, with exception to the day of the holiday stroll. And for that day, we'll have additional staff and volunteers on site to ensure that that we're operating in a good way. We also carry a certificate of insurance. We also carry a general liability policy for the market specifically. And so we work with the risk department on all events to determine that we have adequate policies. I think it's actually codified that we do that. And so we absolutely do that. We consider liability from all of the angles with their assistance, and provide a certificate of insurance listing the city of Nashua as additionally insured for a lot of our programs, and this will be no different than that.
Wonderful. Alderman Lopez.
Farmers Market had performing artists. Will there be performing artists at Alex?
I haven't booked performing artists for Alex. The downstairs is we're going to try to maximize the amount of area that we have dedicated to the vendors. However, the upstairs is quite vast, and so I think that once we get toward the holiday season a little bit more and activate that upstairs, that we'll look to book some entertainment for up there.
So for the first couple weeks, it will be your Pandora radio.
I might also sing.
Oh, good.
Plays guitar and sings, for the record.
Come cheap.
Point that out.
Any other questions, comments? Alderman Jettie.
I hate to bring this up, but I know people are going to be asking, is the city providing this free of charge, or is there any financial arrangement between the vendors and the city, or?
So at this time, the full budget for the event is being dedicated to staffing, advertising, and how do you say staffing, advertising, and I had a third thing, I lost it. The budget's dedicated to staffing, advertising, and
Expenses?
Insurance expenses. That's the other thing. So No, we do not have an arrangement to pay any amount to the city for the use of the space. I would certainly be open to making some manner of payment if that were requested, or even just a good faith contribution to the future use of the space. But there's been nothing arranged at this time.
So could I, oh, go ahead, Alderman Jody.
If I could just follow up, what about reimbursing the city for the utilities that you'll be using?
I would certainly be open to that as well, but I would imagine that would be tough to calculate, considering the concept being for a 4-hour duration on a single day of the week. I would imagine it would be tough to quantify what utilities would be used during that narrow window.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Alderman Tenza, did I see your hand?
My only question for you was if someone wanted to participate in either the farmer's market or the vendor's market upstairs, how would they get information about that?
So the farmer's market is fully subscribed, that initial phase, but the upstairs, we will be making applications available as soon as we have a timeline shored up. In the meantime, people can email me at paulwshea@downtownnashua.org with the subject line holiday market. And I will ensure that they're the first, among the first folks to get the application. At this time, we are not likely, and I don't expect this to change, but we are not likely to accept kind of multi-level marketing and resale vendors. I think it's good to be overt about that upfront. So we're looking for kind of original artwork, crafted, artisanal type products, high quality crafts.
Other questions? Paul, Alderman Clee.
I just wanted to make another comment about the holiday shops upstairs. I can tell you, I worked in the Bedford VA and lived down in that area for a long time, 3 decades ago. But one of my favorite things to do at Christmas time was to go into Lexington to all those little unique shops that sold things just like that, craft items, and I think it will bring people here. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
You mentioned your budget. Just could you give a sense of what your budget is for the winter's farmer's market?
So it's going to depend upon what we get for subscription in the upstairs. I know that in the downstairs, we are fully subscribed. Budget for that space, we have about $4,000 to work with for the 11-week season. I anticipate that approximately $1,600 of that will go towards staffing. About $500 of that will go towards cleaning, and a substantial amount of the remaining portion would go towards advertising. I don't expect us to net much more than $500 for general support of operating from the farmers market operation. The upstairs, it's really going to depend upon subscriptions. So if we get 30 vendors in, we're looking at approximately 6,000 brought in, and we are looking at a substantial amount of that going towards advertising and costs for additional staffing. We would add a second staff person for the upstairs. So the short answer is the downstairs budget we have shored up. The upstairs is going to be quite contingent on how many people we get signed on, which is yet to be seen. Downstairs, I feel very confident about because we've got all the vendors signed on already.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
Can I touch on one more thing?
Sure.
Thank you so much. So this year, we have our 25th annual Winter Holiday Stroll, of course. It's taking place on November 24th. Typically, I send out a letter, but I'd like to invite you all personally because I'm here to join us in the procession from City Hall. You will get a letter as well. But we leave from City Hall at 5 p.m., and often a group of aldermen will lead the procession right at the front of the vehicles. It's also a great help with crowd control as we kind of cruise down Main Street. This year being the 25th anniversary, we're doing a couple of special things. One of them is an art contest for a holiday greeting card. And so we are accepting submissions for that through November 1st. One of the other things that we're working on is collecting photos from the last 25 years of holiday strolls. And what we will do is create a animated photo grid, which will be projected on the Chase building along Main Street, featuring community submitted photos. If you have old photos from the holiday stroll you'd like to send to us, you can send them to stroll25, the number's 25, stroll25photos at downtownnashua.org. And you can find the art submission application at the bottom of the homepage for downtownnashua.org. We are very excited for this year. We've got a couple of other things that we're finalizing to really create a lot of fun opportunities for people to be out and about. And this year we'll also be bringing back the Santa's Village at 30 Temple Street as a daytime activity for parents with young kids who might not have a bedtime that's before the stroll starts. So that will be taking place from 1 to 4 p.m. We will have a train ride, and we will have animatronic reindeer and polar bear. Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus will, of course, be there. I know them personally. So that's very exciting, and a couple of other fun activities in the space. That's one way that we've grown the event, but either way, it's going to be extra special this year, so I hope you can all join us.
Thank you. Alderman Lopez and then Alderman Clee.
I just want to double down on the alderman thing. In past years, we've actually had like a pair of aldermen, Alderman Malizigoya being the other one. So if everybody else could join us, it would be a much more impactful presence. It is the 25th anniversary, so make time for it. When do we get this again?
Alderman Clee.
Well, I can tell you I'll be there. I haven't missed one yet since I've been here. My 2 greyhounds will be with me also, as well as my husband. But that wasn't the comment I wanted to make. On the holiday greeting card, you said by November 1st. How would one, if they were interested in doing this, who do they contact?
So they would go to downtownnashua.org. At the bottom of the page, there's a set of recent posts. One has an image of a holiday greeting card, and it says Holiday Art Contest. If you click on that, there's full details there. There's an online submission form that can be found at that page, and we were also asking folks to, if it's like a watercolor or something like that, to submit it to our office in addition to filling out the form online. The top 3 designs will be on display at 201 Main Street at the market.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, I always go. Last year was my birthday, and I still went to it. So.
If I may, I'd also like the record to reflect that Alderman Dowd was absolutely present at the holiday stroll this past year.
I focused on people walking in the front.
Right, right. Those of us who are really doing crowd control. I understood what you were saying, Alderman Lopez. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to the indoor winter market, and we'll look forward to the stroll, but not the cold weather that may be accompanying it or arriving soon after. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay, we have one petition, and it is, as you heard earlier from Attorney Westgate. It is the petition for the waiver of school impact fees for the Springs, a 62-plus condominium community at 699 and 701 West Hollis Street. Do I have a motion, Alderman Schmidt?
I move to recommend final passage contingent upon planning board.
So I am going to open the discussion. As you heard Alderman McCarthy state, this is something that we have done in the past. It's standard practice. And so the motion that Alderman Schmidt made will just allow us to move this forward, and we'll be able to vote on it at the next full board meeting, rather than waiting for planning board coming back here and then having to go to 2 full board meetings from now. So is there any questions, comments? Alderman Laws?
Has it ever been a contested issue, and if so, why?
No. Alderman Dowd?
Never been a contested issue. In fact, I talked to Alderman McCarthy. We may be changing the legislation because we don't know what to do with the money if we collected it, because it has very, very specific uses, and it's never been collected on 55 and older, and this is 62 and older, so the chances of it impacting the schools are nil.
Right, and as Attorney Westgate indicated, the requirements for 62 and older are a little different. 55 and older, you can have some people who are under 55, and there's a little more flexibility there, but for this cutoff, this community, there would be no impact. Alderman Tenza?
So just to clarify too, if we were to collect the money, it seems like it would just go for capital improvements as a result of new development in a community?
Could it?
Well, I think specifically that's what it goes towards.
It can
Alderman
only
Dowd.
be used for school construction.
Right.
Yeah.
And trying to apply money we collected into a school project, nobody's been able to figure that out anyway, so, and that's why we've never collected it, because it doesn't make sense, and I personally am gonna put in legislation to get rid of it for that group, not totally, but for that group.
Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, I'm not a member of the committee, but I do want to say that I support this and will at the full board, because we need more senior housing. Whether we want to call it elderly housing, senior housing, or whatever term for it, there's a lot of people in Nashua who've been living here for a long time and are going to need to scale down their home plan. I think condominiums let you maintain your home ownership. Other building models allow for different flexibilities, but in general, I think as a board, we should be supportive of senior housing. We have a lot of seniors in Nashua. We want to keep them. They have a lot of resources, or a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, and I think supporting developments that support them is a really good trend for us to continue.
I agree.
Any other comments, Alderman Jettie?
So I don't know the answer to this, so that's why I'm asking the question, but does anybody know this, the 62-plus condominium community law? Does it, Attorney Westgate said that it was very strict about you can't be older than
I'm going to ask
60
Director Marchant to come up.
62. So if I got one of these condominiums and children and grandchildren came to live with me, is that prohibited?
You would have to be over 62.
Yes, it would be prohibited. Yeah.
Is that a selling point? Asking for a friend.
The 55 and over developments, the difference is set by federal law. The 55 and older versus 62 and older. 62 and older is all parties have to be 62 and older. The 55 and over law has flexibility. 80% of the units have to be 55 and older, and it's one person, not both, or not all. And so 20% of the units can have some flexibility in age.
I'm sorry, say that again, about the one person?
In the 55 and older, you have to have the main, one person has to be 55 and older.
Okay,
In the 62 and older, all people have to be 62
all
and older.
residents have to be over 62?
And it isn't set by Nashua. That's a part of the federal law. There's just 2 levels to it, 2 tiers.
And as Director Marchant said, there's a percentage in the 55 and older community that can be under 55. So like we had friends who were living in a community and we met someone and she said, well, I've been living here for umpteen years. And she said, I moved in when I was 40 and she was the only and we were like, how did that happen? But there's that percentage that would allow for that.
Okay, so I just wanted to confirm, so when Attorney Westgate said that there'd be no chance that any children would end up living in these places, that's accurate, right?
That would be accurate. Legally, there's no chance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other questions, comments? So you've heard the motion by Alderman Schmidt for final passage being contingent on the recommendation from the planning board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that was carried, and we'll go to the full board. Unfinished business, we have none. New business resolutions.
None?
Yes, and new business ordinances, we have 018-026. This is amending the zoning map by rezoning the two areas on Amherst Street from Airport Industrial to Park Industrial with the mixed-use overlay. And this went to the planning board, and they gave it a favorable recommendation on October 4th. Alderman Tenza, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. I know you were at that planning board. Is there anything you would like to comment on that came from that planning board regarding their favorable recommendation?
No, I mean, I think there were some questions, but they were more just clarifying questions for both 018, 26, and 27 about what it would mean, or how it would affect future development. But I think everyone was favorably received both ordinances.
Okay, and I need a motion to recommend.
Make a
Alderman
motion.
Tenza?
Yep.
And to recommend
Final passage, yes.
Okay, so you heard the public comment, the information from Alderman Tenza. Any questions, comments? Alderman Dowd?
Well, I was on the airport authority for 15 years and on the chairman of the ZBA for a few after that. And we've been struggling with this issue for a number of years. And Director Marchand has finally come up with this that's going to save people money and make it easier to locate what should be located in that spot. Because it's never going to be used for airport industrial, as was explained by Attorney Westgate.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, is it possible to put the map up?
I think some of the holes in that map were previously rezoned.
Correct.
Yeah, so that you're anticipating my question.
Been through this a couple times.
So I think Director Marchand answered this question for me before, but I just wanted to clarify publicly. So as we look at the yellow, this is the part that's going to be rezoned. So after that's, assuming this goes through, after that's done, will all of the western part of Amherst Street be all the same zone? Those white, from Sharon Avenue, there's some white along Amherst Street, and then, further up, there's a big white block and
Like in here?
in there and there, yeah. So will that all be the same zone?
No. Great question. This is going to be HB. Those areas that are out are zoned HB right now.
What's going to be HB?
The areas they're out, I'm sorry, the mouse is always so hesitant from out here.
Those squarish
Yeah,
areas.
and this space that isn't going to be rezoned is currently HB, will stay HB. And the other space will stay HB. Trying to get my mouse to move. I always want to bring a pointer. All right, that space as well is currently HB and will stay HB. The reason we didn't want to rezone the area in yellow to HB is that it's currently an industrial underlying zone. And we wanted to keep it an underlying industrial zone because there's a potential difference in assessed value if it went to HB, which is a commercial base versus an industrial base. And we didn't want to switch the base from an industrial to commercial. And so this allows it to stay industrial, but if you pull down the overlay district, if you have a special use in that area or you need it, you can get approvals through the planning board, through the conditional use process, if it's appropriate.
Okay, and could you tell me what what the major differences are between highway business and park industrial? Is park industrial / mixed use one zone, or is that two different things?
So so park industrial is the underlying zoning district. So that's kind of the word on park industrial versus airport industrial. The mixed use is an overlay district. So you'll see that in different areas of the city. We have a mixed use overlay partnered. It's almost described as like a floating district that is above certain areas, and you can pull it down if that is useful to you as a property owner in that district. So we have GI mixed use, GIMU, which is the mill yard is a GI mixed use, which is how Clock Tower's there. We have a couple different types of mixed use overlay districts. We have some PIMU or GIMU out towards the future train station area. The main difference, let me see if I can give you quick definitions here. HB and GB is highway business and general business. So those are commercial districts, as I said. Highway business, commercial area located adjacent to heavily traveled arterial roads such as Amherst Street and DW. General business is similar to the HB district in purpose, function, and appearance, but requires a smaller minimum lot size. So it allows it to be a little bit more compact. They're found in close proximity to the HB district, but tend to be developed as shopping centers with large parking areas, including malls, rather than strip commercial development, which characterizes the HB. I think we have 18 or 20 zoning districts from our almost 20-year-old master plan and land use code. And so I will yet again make a plug for the fact that we really need to update our zoning ordinance, which then we could update our land use code to better reflect the reality of Nashua in 2018, 2019, which is a very different place. Amherst Street and DW Highway are perfect examples of how they've completely moved to a redevelopment phase. And development of those commercial strips is entirely different today than it was in the early 2000s. So there's my plug. I will try not to do it too many times.
And Alderman Dowd would like to comment, please.
Yeah, those two white spots that you see, those were some of the land that Attorney Prunier put in legislation to change the zoning to HB, and it was successful. And therein lies the fees he was talking about.
Yes.
So this will allow some easement in what you can put in that area without it costing the person applying a slight fortune.
Any other comments, questions? Alderman Jettie?
So the need for a master plan update that you talk about, is that not a responsibility of your department?
I like to think so to some extent, but it is ultimately in Nashua, the way the city charter and the ordinances are written, it's ultimately the Board of Aldermen is the policy board, and through the Planning and Economic Development Committee, in partnership with the Planning Board, they are responsible for the master plan. By state law, normally it's just the Planning Board, but in Nashua, we being a city have made sure that it's part of the policy board and the Planning and Economic Development Committee.
Director Marchant and I've had conversations about this, and one of the issues is the money to support this. And through capital improvements, How much did we get last year, the year before? Is it
It's
three?
been in the capital improvements plan, this is the fourth year since I've been here. I've been plugging
Right.
it about $400,000.
Right, that was either last year or the year before you got that.
Well, it's been rolled forward
Right.
repeatedly.
Okay,
Yeah.
but has any been awarded? I thought,
No. Oh, so $50,000 was awarded 2 years ago, and that
Two.
money went to the Riverfront Master Plan.
okay, so it's been some piecemeal stuff, but there's the money piece to go along with that. Yes, Alderman Dowd.
There, as Director Marchand has said, there are several areas of the city where zoning needs to be worked at, but she can't stop everything she's doing and just focus on this. We had some discussion on this, because this has been a problem for decades. And fixing this now is the first step in looking at the entire zoning picture. There'll be more legislation coming through.
Alderman Lopez.
Just to observe, the capital improvement plan has a number of projects that we kind of kick to the end despite their recommendation and scaling. So when we do the budget, everybody should read the capital improvement plan in order to see where it fits. And we should do probably a better job of integrating that into our plans, because we keep on missing their ranking until it's a project that's late. And I guess Director Marchant might be able to speak more specifically to this, or Alderman Dowd, but the capital improvement review process is part of our charter, isn't it?
It's part of state law, and sorry.
No.
So we just should be paying much more attention to that, because that also would suggest that we should be working on our master plan.
So Alderman Tenza.
I know this is a little off topic, but I know the planning board is eager to start discussions on a new master plan as well. And really is just waiting for the funding from the Board of Aldermen. So I think the more we talk about it, and the other thing too, I think what we saw with the Riverfront Master Plan is that today we have a great opportunity to get a lot of people involved with the co-urbanize and you know, people making comments online about what they would like to see. And we're probably at a really good position in the city to be looking forward with all the different projects we have going on. So I'm glad this conversation's coming up, and hopefully it's something that we continue to talk about through next spring.
Alderman Jettie.
So I have 2 points. One, the money you're talking about, do we hire a firm to do this for us, or do we hire more people to work with you, or what's the money for?
Yeah, great question. Yes, it would be to bring in private consultants to help us to actually conduct the whole master planning outreach effort. Somewhat of like we did with the Riverfront Plan, we brought in design professionals because that's not something we have on staff. It's a massive time commitment as well. So some organization, the analysis piece in the background, those design professionals to make the pretty pictures, which help people give their comments and ideas and responses and turn that around. So it would be for that, and then we would. Normally that money would then, you finish the master plan and then you fix the code. This was done by also different professionals. We don't have a deep enough bench in staff at all to do this and manage the current flow of development review applications and all the other projects we're working on. So it's certainly something that I feel very strongly our staff have to be majorly involved in and giving as much time as possible to. This is a staff-run project with consultant support. It's not a consultant-driven project. But it is something that it's a massive investment. It usually takes 18 months to 2 years to get through the process of master planning, to really get out to the community, to analyze all that data, to put it all back together, and to come up with a plan. And as Alderman Tenza was saying, there's really cool new ways to do it. It doesn't, I don't know if you've seen the last master plan, but it's kind of looks like this. It doesn't have to be a textbook. It doesn't have to be a tomb. There's many new ways to do this, so it's actually useful and pliable. And so I think that we could look to some other examples around us in the region that have been redone well right now.
And another.
Yeah, Alderman Jettie and then Alderman Lopez.
So my other point was that when I was asking about the red line that outlines the yellow there.
Mm-hmm.
So that line kind of, looks like it goes through lots. It doesn't follow lot lines. So looks like there's a lot that's going to be half in this new zone and half in the old zone. Can't we avoid that? Is it? That's a problem for somebody in one zone who thinks it's the regulations for the other zone are better for them. They're going to go before the ZBA and say, well, we're half in this zone and half in that zone, and we want, better treatment for that reason, or vice versa. Can't we avoid that?
Oh, Director Marchant?
We have a clause in our code that specifically states if you're a split zone, the larger portion rules the whole property. So that does avoid those people having to go to the zoning board for relief. They are part of that. To simplify this process, we were just going by the existing zoning boundaries. The new line is the railroad track because that's an easy thing to describe versus trying to go back through parcels. Some of the parcels that you see that are that don't follow the zoning line, that's because they have been subdivided since the zoning line went into place. And so the zoning line did reflect parcel lines initially, but as people come in and subdivide or move lot lines, they move. And so I think at this time, this is more than sufficient, especially with the clause in the zone that allows for people to use the dominant zone automatically.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Alderman Lopez, did
My comment was really just in reference to the master plan. It was done in 2000, so it really needs to be updated.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you've heard the motion for final passage of 018-026. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? That motion carries. The next ordinance is 018-027, which was the second part of our public hearing, amending the airport approach zone overlay district. Do I have a motion? Alderman Tenza?
Motion for final passage of 018-027.
Okay. And do you have anything other than what you shared around the previous ordinance from planning board regarding this?
No, I mean, I think the big part of the discussion on this new ordinance was, I think we all came to understand that, quite frankly, the FAA federal regulations are going to trump anything that we do here on the city level. So I think this just puts in line our regulations for anybody who knows, anyone who looks at the zoning maps, if they're trying to develop in that area.
Okay. Any other comments? Alderman Dowd?
Yeah, this is a normal upgrade every time we touch the main runway. And the guidelines that this ordinance is taking into account are all dictated by federal law.
Any other comments? Alderman Tenza?
May I just ask too, Attorney Prunier brought up building regulations about soundproofing. Is that also something that's required by federal law under one of these overlay districts?
I don't know that federal law requires the soundproofing specifically. The Gale Associates did a study on the noise associated. I do believe that the decimal levels associated with the uses are suggested by federal law, but I don't know if they're law. I don't think I'd go that far to say that. But I think that the level of decibels regarding the type of use, I believe, is suggested by the FAA, yes.
And Director Marchant, that change regarding soundproofing is for new construction, not for existing construction, unless it does, like existing construction that's being redeveloped would have to have maybe the new?
Yeah, probably if it went over the 50% threshold. It's for the airport approach zone as well. And that, if you look at this map, sorry, oh, and then I moved it. It's for the area to the due east and due west of the airport. Due west of the airport is 90% conservation land, but it was in the old ordinance, but what we did is instead of just, we needed to add the new uses in case any of the new uses were in that area as well. So for example, in the old ordinance, housing wasn't listed because we just left it out. And so now we've put the whole updated table in. So all the uses that might be within that zone fall in there. To the east, we get pretty close to the highway, and it's hard to show visually, but as this is an X, Y, and Z, the 3D zone, it gets higher as it gets further out and wider. So the likelihood of this affecting anybody is very minimal unless people wanted to build 20-story buildings or something very significant in those areas. And quite frankly, I don't think it's going to come up as a major issue for anybody. It's not going to affect these new properties we just rezoned on Amherst Street, so.
Any other comments, questions? Alderman Lopez and then
I
Alderman
feel like the
Jody.
noise, or the noise part of it and encouraging developers to soundproof is just not even a bad idea. It's having people move into spaces near an airport and just saying, oh, well, you're near an airport, you know that. One of the number one complaints I get downtown is actually motorcycles. So if somebody had thought, oh, you live in a city with motorcycles, it doesn't matter the person who's being affected by it. So encouraging prior proper planning can't be a bad idea.
Alderman Jody.
I kind of agree with that sentiment, but are you saying that when Attorney Prunier said that people developing, potential developers of this property that we just rezoned might be discouraged from development because of additional cost imposed by the soundproofing requirement, are you saying that he's not accurate about that?
Just the area is not accurate. If somebody was developing that in, I don't know why this thing keeps going dead on me. If somebody was developing, say, right off of Sharon Ave, that is at the far east end of the airport zone, and they wanted to build something tall and put housing, they would be subject to this. But this area to the north of the railroad tracks doesn't fall within the airport approach zone. And so it wouldn't necessarily be subject to this.
Okay.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, two things. I can verify that on the west side of that airport is, nobody's building there, ever. So that's not a problem. And on the other side, the only residentials that have been built lately were soundproofed for sale value.
Could I?
Yes, Alderman
When you
Jody.
say no one's going to build west of the airport, why is that?
Because it's mostly conservation land.
Oh.
Buildings not allowed.
Okay, any other questions, comments? So the motion by Alderman Tenza is to recommend final passage of 018-027. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And that motion is carried. We have one item tabled in committee, 018-019, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding urban chickens. Do I hear a motion to take from the table, if that's the desire of?
Also move.
Okay, Alderman Schmidt. All those in favor? Aye. So, and now, for the purposes of discussion, do I have a motion? Final passage?
Oh, recommend for final passage.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
The motion by Alderman Schmidt is to recommend final passage, and we will open for discussion, and Alderwoman Kelly, would you like to say anything but as kicking off the discussion for this evening? Or?
Oh, way to put me on the spot.
Oh,
I've
you're
been
the
sitting here all night.
primary sponsor.
You're the cock of the walk.
All right.
Before we get into discussion, I'll just say that I have worked very collaboratively with Director Martian on this, and I think the amendment as I'm sorry, the legislation as amended from the past meeting is a really well-working set of regulations, and in fact, it will make chickens the most regulated animal in the city.
Okay. And for people who may be watching or will be watching tomorrow, and they may not have caught the amendments that were made or the amendment that was made previously, would you just summarize that?
Yeah, I believe all we added was the word adult, so that
Right.
way we're making sure that there's 6 adult chickens.
Right.
I don't remember another one. I think that was it.
Oh, Director Marchand?
Ceiling height was another one.
Yeah, I was just gonna,
Say, sure.
Yeah.
So we amended the enclosure height to match the top of the coop height to 8
Right.
feet, at a suggestion from the crowd. And I think we further defined, oh, nope, the rest were already there, housekeeping. They were already part of amendments.
okay, so, comments, questions? Alderman Jettie, yes.
So I was away when we had the last meeting, so I was unable to participate. But I did watch the previous hearing, and I do have some questions on so the would be the second page, section 190-31, period 1, keeping of chickens. In paragraph C, subparagraph 3, it talks about the keeping of chickens shall be accessory to and on the premises of a single-family or two-family detached dwelling. So my question was, I noticed that we're amending, we're going to allow chickens if this passes. Chickens, as I understand it, are already allowed in the R40 and R30 zones. And this will expand allow them in all the other residential zones, R18, R9, A, B, and C.
Correct.
And my concern, and Director Marchand, if you could talk about this. My concern is whether or not we are allowing chickens in too dense an area. People have, not a lot, but some people have contacted me and said that they're concerned about in a high density area, the chickens, they're afraid that the chickens make noise, they irritate neighbor dogs, and that some of these high density zones are not appropriate for this. And I notice it's for single or two family. So
Right.
I'm wondering if
Director
you could
Marshall?
address that.
This is an urban chicken ordinance. We did quite a bit of research. Attorney Leonard has also been helping with this project on communities around New Hampshire, but also nationally about how they handle this. I will say it's pretty common in other parts of the country, and even in New Hampshire, we're kind of behind the times in this. And we have spacing allowed here. There's not allowed to be roosters. And we believe that the regulations that have been set forth are designed to make sure that they are treated and cared for as necessary without being without being too much based on space constraints. They will have to comply with accessory structure setbacks, and that's part of that statement that they are an accessory use. And we wouldn't allow them on a multifamily property, but that is something that is deliberately part of this to allow for chickens in a more urbanized, dense area.
Could could I follow up?
Yes, Alderman
So
Jettie.
when you talk about spacing, what is the spacing? I know that there's the ordinance talks about, a certain amount of space per chicken. But the only restriction I see on the building is that they be within the setback requirement, which is as little as 10 feet on most lots, right?
6 for an accessory structure.
So, 6 feet, so can be even closer.
Correct.
And the zoning board can also grant a variance to allow it to be even closer than that, correct?
If there was a specific case of hardship, yes, that they made it.
It may be a concept that the zoning board is not familiar with, but,
What's that one?
but we'll leave that for a discussion for another time. So would it be possible to extend, I know one of my constituents sent me an article written by a chicken expert from the Pennsylvania State University, and he recommended that there be 25 feet setback from the lot line for the chicken coop. Would that be possible, or is that too onerous a restriction?
What I can say is that in our zoning, in some of these zoning districts, that is more of a setback than required of the backyard. So it could significantly limit areas that chickens would be allowed. For example, the minimum, these are only allowed in side and rear lots, right? The minimum rear setback, so what lots were actually built for, what you could build your house and minimum to the back, is 20 feet in the RB district. It's 25 in the RA district. So in lots that meet those requirements, and there's many that are non-conforming as well that don't even meet that. I mean, the backyards are not even 25 feet deep, right? And so that would exclude any properties that didn't, if you had a 25-foot setback from your neighbor's property line, and you have to have it so many feet from your house, I believe 10 feet, you wouldn't be allowed to have chickens. And if it was 25 feet from the side and the rear, you don't have a backyard that big. It'll be right in the center if you did, a little tiny square. So I understand where you're coming from in wanting to make sure that it isn't directly against a abutting property owner's property line, but I think that we have a wonderfully dense city. We have many, many lots that are not, that are barely a quarter acre that people live on in this city. And so those lots are tight, but they have plenty of space for everybody. And I don't think that if that was the choice of the board to make a recommendation like that, I think it would severely reduce the amount of lots and properties that would be able to have chickens.
Alderman Kelly and then Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, Sarah and I talked earlier, and she did a quick analysis, I'll say, that currently, the way this is written, 21,000 households would be eligible, and if we were to go down to half an acre, it would be 1,700. So that really significantly affects how many people would be even eligible to participate.
Okay, Alderman Lopez?
So the intent is an urban chicken, and representing some of the denser areas in the city. I've heard a lot of enthusiasm for this, not necessarily that people are going to sign up for it, but they like the idea, they want the option, they want the flexibility, and this would prohibit a lot of people that I represent, so I would not appreciate such a large setback change. I know also that it did come up in the previous meeting that dogs might bark at it or something like that. Dogs will bark at cats. Dogs will bark at birds that are flying around. They'll bark at squirrels. Dogs will bark at dogs. So I don't think a chicken's going to upset the apple cart. I think it's just going to be another neighborhood creature, that only a slightly more productive one than most of the ones we have for pets.
Other comments? questions?
I think,
Oh, I'm
Alderman
sorry,
Laws.
Alderman Laws.
I was very lazily raising my hand. I'd support what they were just saying. I think that if we're going to do this, if we're going to run this chicken experiment, I think we should run this chicken experiment and not limit the capacity and the information that we gain from it to 1,700 households. The households that Alderman Lopez represents are also the households that I represent, and I feel like there's no reason to inhibit them from partaking in this. If we're going to make it a thing, let's make it a thing. Otherwise, what's the point?
Alderman Tenza and then Alderman Jettie.
So, I mean, I guess, and I've circulated my proposed amendments to the committee. I've had the ability, because of my position on this committee, as well as the planning board, sitting through a couple different public hearings on this. And I guess my take, after listening to everybody and listening, looking, doing research on it, is that, urban chicken farming, I guess, would be the term, for the most part, is a pastime or a hobby that people like to engage in. If I thought that this was a way for, people in the densely populated areas, maybe the lower income areas, to really help themselves, I would have a different opinion, I think, of this. But I think that, the folks who are going to get involved in this, and Director Marchand said at the planning board that this isn't going to explode. We're not going to have 1,700 households. We're not going to have 10,000 households who are going to go out and buy 6 chickens in the next year or so. And so, I mean, I think that as the proposed ordinance recognizes in its initial statement, these chickens have the ability to be a nuisance going forward. We're already limiting who can and can't have chickens by saying it's got to be single-family or two-family residences. We're already limiting it by the setback. I mean, if you drive down the Tree Street area, those folks don't have, 6 feet between their lot line and 10 feet from their house for chickens, even the single-family homes or the two-family homes. So it's not, if we're thinking about the folks who are in the most densely populated parts of the city, they're probably not, if they applied for a permit, they probably wouldn't qualify anyway. And so, I took a look at what some of the other cities and towns are doing. And I mean, I think this would be the most inclusive, the most permissive ordinance on the books in the state from what I've seen. And I haven't looked at, for cities at least, I haven't looked at Portsmouth or Keene. I don't know what they do. But, I mean, I think there's some valid reasons to regulate it a little bit more. In particular, the city's always regulated urban chickens or any other livestock by the size of the lot and not necessarily the zone that folks live in. And so I know that Manchester has their zoning ordinance allows you have to have at least a half an acre. And then as you have, more quarter acres, 3/4 of an acre or more, you can add more chickens than the 6, which are allowed under the ordinance or under the ordinance. And that makes sense. You have the room so that you can ensure that the chickens in your yard are not a nuisance to your neighbors. And so that's, the reason that I circulated that, and eventually I'll make a motion on my proposed amendments. As Alderman Jettie pointed out, we would be the only community in the state where there's not at least a 20-foot setback from your neighbor's property in order to put the chicken coop. So we would literally be able to put it 6 feet from your neighbor's property, and their house could be 10 feet from their property line, so 15 feet, a little over 5 yards, and your neighbor would have no recourse whatsoever, other than to call planning and economic development and constantly have them out there and complain to the police department and do everything else. So. And then the third proposed amendment that I circulated was something that the city of Concord did. And what they did is they essentially put a sunset clause on their proposed ordinance to see how things were going, and then revisited the issue 18 months after it initially passed. And so, to the extent, and I have heard from people who are concerned about the effects that this would have in their neighborhoods, to the extent that people would be concerned, this would give us some time to go back and look and see what was working, what wasn't working. It would also allow us some time to collect some data. I appreciate Director Marchant saying that this is the call that she gets most frequently, but we don't collect stats on that. We don't know how many people are going to pull permits. It could be that 35 people pull permits and it's not a big deal. And we could say to people, listen, it's been legal for over a year. It's not going to be the end of the world, but without having that kind of data, it's tough for people who are nervous about it. So those are my thoughts. I know it's we all want to see if there are folks in the community who are going to be responsible about it. We want to be able for them to do that and participate in this in their I hate to call it a hobby because I know people are more passionate about it than that, but really we're looking at chickens as folks' pets, and not necessarily as a means to feed themselves. So that's where I'm coming from with my proposed amendments. And as I mentioned before, I don't know if there's any other comments. I can make a motion. Either it's up to the chair whether you'd like me to make one motion or.
Well, I think people want to have discussion. If, Alderman Jettie, then Alderman Clee.
Okay, I had some other things. The question of no person shall sell eggs. So I'm wondering what the reason for, if people have more eggs than they can consume themselves, what's the harm in their selling them to their neighbors?
They're welcome to give them away. But this isn't about creating. So the state of New Hampshire has a very large, detailed, long definition of agriculture and different sales. This isn't getting into sales and the retail side of agriculture. This is simply at your home for yourself, for your persons, and we don't want to cross that line at all. So as far as giving away eggs is fine, but this isn't for something that is for making money or any kind of commercial nature.
Yeah, Alderman Jettie.
Another, so the I think it's I'm not sure
there's no
exactly where
page
it
numbers.
follows, but it's paragraph 7.
Yep. An enclosed run, it starts
Right.
with. Yes?
So it talks about a maximum height for the run. And I don't know if there's a maximum height on the, so there's a maximum height on the coop. What about a minimum?
So when you do research online, or when we even just look at what the cooperative extension or even the farmers exchange here has, coops can be very small and you can have 2 chickens. And so the minimums are covered by the square footage that is required to be provided for the chicken, not necessarily a height minimum.
Okay. And if I could continue, Madam Chairman?
Yes, please.
So then, 93-3, keeping and housing animals. So this, I understand that this is an existing ordinance, and this, what the proposal that we're looking at tonight would add, except for chickens. And the ordinance as it stands now says, it shall be unlawful for any person to keep and house any animal in any structure built or located within 45 feet of any building occupied by human beings. So I have a cat that lives with me and my wife, and my wife would be very upset if I had to move the cat to a separate structure 45 feet away.
On your neighbor's yard, maybe.
In the, so I think I think you and I have talked about this. I think this needs to be clarified that any animal has to be better defined. Don't you agree?
I would agree. So I reached out to the health officer. This section is under the health officer's purview. They have jurisdiction here. It is from the health officer section. And Heidi had said that they've always interpreted this ordinance to mean structures to build to house larger animals. And they've only used this ordinance a few times in her length of being here, which I think is 15 plus years. But it was more in regards to unsanitary conditions and husbandry. She feels like this harkens back to another time when maybe we were a more agrarian society, and it isn't really reflective of today. She has done a lot of work at the state, and we actually relooked today. There's no definition anywhere in New Hampshire or the city of pet or household pet. And so I would agree with you that this section needs work, and we'll certainly suggest that we go back and look at that with the health officer separately, yes.
Okay, so if I can continue.
Yes, please.
I appreciate the health officer saying that she would not interpret this the way it reads, but I'm a great, I've been schooled by many law professors and many judges that laws mean what they say, and the words the words mean what they say, and you can't interpret them the way you want to interpret them. So I think that I think we need to. I think we ought to take advantage of this opportunity to clarify that and make it better. And so
So you think maybe we should provide the first definition of pets to clarify this?
Yes, I don't know that it would be the first. I'm sure that someone has defined pets.
I thought, I heard Director Marchant say in the state, you could not, the health officer couldn't find any definition.
No, and she did a lot of work on related to the state rabies law and
Yeah.
helping to create that, and they discussed that, I guess, in great depth about pet, household pet versus at that time, and no definition was agreed upon at that point in time. But so there isn't one that we have.
Okay. So,
Doesn't mean one couldn't be created.
right. Are you done? Finished, Alderman Jettie?
Yes.
Okay.
you.
Alderman Clee, you're welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's not news that I've had concerns about this. And to be honest with you, the majority of people that contact me are indifferent. So, I'll be straight with that, and probably equal, very enthusiastic to very angry about it. But most of them are indifferent. So my biggest concern, and I think those that seem to be negative about it, was I'm going to call it the tattling rule that we seem to have in Nashua. So if you have a problem with code enforcement, they're always right there on the spot when you call them. No one has ever complained about that. But we don't regulate it in the fact of that no one's going to go and check on it to make sure that the manure is being cleaned up or that the chickens, it's addressed when a neighbor calls, which means neighbor on neighbor, and we end up with a lot of fights. And I can tell you, in my ward, I've got a few of these neighbor disputes, and I'm sure that's the way all over the city, and it becomes quite ugly.
You just build fences.
I don't think fences would help in these particular cases, but it's a good point. But and the bottom line, and Director Marchant knows specifically certain things that I speak of, is that code enforcement goes out, and the people are right on the edge of whether or not they're compliance with the law, and their hands are tied, which just irritates neighbor after neighbor. So my feeling is if we don't have a way of monitoring that we're doing this without a neighbor calling, I have grave concerns about it. So it's just a statement I wanted to make and put out there.
Okay. Alderman Laws and then Alderman Lopez.
I respect everyone's concerns, and I think that they're legitimate. I just also think that we're speculating about what people are going to be upset about in a situation that we haven't seen yet. And I think to the point of these proposed amendments to the legislation, I'd be willing to, and again, I don't have a chicken in this race, all right? I don't, it doesn't bother me. I don't have a lot at my house where I can raise chickens. I just believe that if people want to do that, who are we to tell them that they can't? And I also anticipate that after this has happened, provided that it passes the Board of Aldermen, I think it's going to be a much smaller issue. A couple of people, I don't think it's going to be as important as everyone thinks. So I'm saying that why don't we try to figure it out where I'm okay from reducing the number of chickens from 6 to 4 just to start it out. I'm okay with that. If you want to make it so the lot has to be at least a half an acre, I'm okay with that. The property line has to be 20, 30 feet, I'm okay with that. But then it's this part where we have to revisit it in the sunset clause. I think that once we get to that, if it turns out that Director Marchant hasn't been getting all of these people freaking out about chickens, I think that we should reopen the possibility to now people can have 6 chickens. Now people can have on a quarter of an acre. Now people can have the coop, not be so far away from the house. And that way, we start out with 1,700 families being able to do this, and then probably a year from now, 18 months from now, when I'm hoping that I'm right about this and I don't look like a total jerk, that it'll expand to 27,000 families. And we'll see that this isn't really that huge of a deal. Would anybody be agreeable to that?
Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. So actually, I think some of the things in here are okay. I think 4 chickens, fine. I do disagree with dropping it to half an acre. I think that in order to see if this is my husband's a scientist, okay? So in order to see if this is working, you have to have a good sample and a good amount of time. So if we do it on tiny little lots with 1,700 people, are the only people in a 90,000 person city to see if this works, it's not going to be a true example of whether this works. So I think that would be my concern on a sunset clause and making it so restrictive that very few people can take advantage of it.
Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, I still maintain my position that we already have animals. Like, there's no yard setbacks on a Chihuahua, and those things are the loudest things ever. So
Worst.
it's like a lion trapped in a tiny dog. But I think we're going to have some tiny nuisance, and maybe there's going to be neighbors in the city who might have an issue with this. But as has already been basically acknowledged, we're probably not going to see a whole flock of chickens moving in. I doubt we're going to see the rampant concerns or complaints to justify restricting the ability of people in some areas from having them, if they so choose. And I'd also point out that people who are driving through the tree streets, a lot of them have bigger yards than you would think. Pierce Street being a really good example of people who probably do qualify for this and could easily put a chicken coop in there, not being allowed to because assumptions are being made about density and property lines and just general desire. I think if some people want to have these, then they can meet the conditions that we lay out. Why are we denying them that?
Thoughts? Other comments?
I would like to.
Yes, Alderman Schmidt.
First, I'd like to thank you very much for the chicken map that you drew for me. It really made it clear to the people in my ward. I got lots of people who said that's a really great idea. They won't do it, but they think it's a great idea. And I didn't get anyone saying that they thought it would be a disaster. I really think it would be good for families. It would be good for children. It would be good for the community. So I'm not happy about number 3. Number 3 worries me a little because if people have invested, they've built the coop, they've got everything going, then a year later they're told they have to get rid of it. That bothers me. Yes.
Director Marchant.
Just to be clear, if it's in zoning, the way the zoning law would work, if this was to sunset, everybody who had gotten them within the time it was allowed would be allowed to continue because of the way zoning works. But going forward, nobody else would be allowed to do it if it's sunsetted.
Thank you.
Questions, other comments? Alderman Jettie?
So I'm wondering if Alderman Tenzer is going to make a motion to amend or not, and I'm wondering about the ordinance that prohibits animals in any structure within 45 feet, whether that should be amended, except for chickens. So you could have a chicken sleeping with you, but my cat's got to leave.
If, Director Marchant, if we were to do whatever to this evening and move it forward without addressing the housing within 45 feet, is that something that we would be addressing, or is it something that the Board of Health would be bringing to us? Where would we see that change coming from?
Great question. I would think that it needs to come from legal to you, right? It would be it would be another ordinance amendment. And I will pass this on to the health officer and be more than happy to talk to her about moving something forward with this.
Okay.
The other thing I could offer is if you want to see the actual map, it is somewhat powerful, and I'm sorry I didn't have enough time, but I could bring you on another meeting a map of the half-acre lots or quarter-acre lots, so you could see their distribution in the city as well, and what areas are not served at all versus what areas might be served, if that's useful. If it's not, I don't have to, that's for sure. But that is something that we can produce. I just was not able to this evening.
Members of the committee, would you like to see that? I mean, we can table this. We can bring it back at another meeting. Would you like to see the map?
So Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I'll just say, I mean, the only reason I took that half-acre lot, again, is because that's what they decided in Manchester. And so it seemed to me that seemed like a reasonable amount of space for, to have enough room to keep chickens so they wouldn't be a nuisance.
I have excuse me, I'm sorry, I have a question as you were saying that, because someone had this conversation with me about what was in ours. In Manchester, where they do have the larger lot size, are they talking about chickens who are kept in coops or coops with runs, or are they talking about free-range chickens?
Their ordinance, and correct me if I'm wrong, was very similar to the proposed ordinance here, whereas it was 6 chickens, substantially the same language, and so they would have to be housed. I mean, and again, I'll be clear, if you live in R30 or R40 zone, you can have free-range chickens, you can have 100 chickens on in your yard here in Nashua. And this ordinance wouldn't affect those zones whatsoever. So it's just those other areas that we're talking about now.
Yeah. Director Marchant, did you?
No.
Okay. Alderwoman Kelly, and then Alderman Jettie.
Actually, this is to you, because I know you did quite a bit of research talking to the other cities. I'd be interested to know sort of what the layouts of those cities are in terms of how big their parcels are in comparison to ours, that type of thing.
I don't know off the top of my head. I tend to see us, Nashua, closer to Dover because of the way our downtown is and Dover's downtown is, and the way that the lots are laid out. in my head, I think we're more similar to Dover than Manchester. Also in just housing construction, Manchester has those beautiful triple deckers, and we don't. We have a very different style of housing in our downtown as well. And Dover is much more similar to us with the more traditional older colonials that have been modified into different multifamilies and not the triple decker style. So I don't know specifically off the top of my head. I do know that Dover has, I think, the half-acre minimum as well, and allows the no, that's not true. Dover has a 20-foot setback and 6 chickens. And so they use, I think, the setback to help limit where it can be versus a lot size. But I don't have them all off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
And it's late. Yeah.
So-
Alderman Jettie.
I would like the opportunity to talk to legal about fixing this animal in the house problem. So I would move that we table this, and then you could bring the chicken map the next time, and maybe that would allay a lot of our constituents' concerns.
So you've heard Alderman Jettie's motion to table, and I believe it's because he knows the cat's watching and he doesn't want the door locked when he gets home.
The cat's mother is watching. So.
Even more powerful. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we will table this to our next meeting.
And can I
Yes.
just as a sum up, and I appreciate everyone's time. I know it's late. I just want everyone on the committee, anyone in the community, and the Board of Aldermen at large to know that as a sponsor of this bill, I am available to talk to you guys, come up with some solutions. Like ultimately, we want to get to a place where everybody's comfortable with
Right.
it. So.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Public comment. They're probably all at home talking to us right now. Remarks by Alderman. Anyone? Alderman Lopez.
So Attorney Dupin made some observations at the end of the planning board regarding the length of time that was spent debating issues that are somewhat basic, such as chickens, in comparison to larger city economic issues such as elderly housing and the need for a master plan. So I think we really should be looking at supporting a master plan and all that it entails, because that would let us better focus ourselves on our city priorities.
And I guess to that, I would say, understanding the need for a master plan, and obviously everyone is coming to appreciate that, we need to think about that at budget time and make that a priority. So, and I know Alderman Marchant has some numbers about what we would need and.
Director.
Or director, I'm
Don't need
sorry.
that person. Thank you, though.
I demoted you, I'm sorry. Any other remarks by Alderman?
I would like to also
Yeah.
say that I am 100% in favor of updating our master plan. I think it's very necessary. I think the planning board and certainly the zoning board of adjustment needs some guidance about my own observation. I may be wrong about this, but my own observation is that a lot of our planning is being implemented by the zoning board of adjustment by granting variances to our existing zoning ordinance. And it bothers me that the members of the zoning board are taking what should be the proper role of the alderman of this city and the planning board in planning the city. And the ordinances that we've adopted, the zoning ordinances, should be enforced, and that they shouldn't be variances shouldn't be given unless all of the requirements are met. And I don't think they're doing that right now. And so I think part of the reason is that they feel that our zoning ordinances are outdated, and they're taking it upon themselves to to rewrite our zoning laws by granting variances.
Right, and I would say that both our zoning board and our planning board are volunteers. And I think they volunteer because they truly have the best interests of the city and the residents in their hearts and guiding their decision-making. But as Director Marchant said, there are times when what we have on the books and what we're trying to do, and even as we look at economic development, I mean, the ordinances we passed tonight around the airport, we're constantly coming in and making these piecemeal changes. And certainly we've had many conversations in many different arenas about doing something in a comprehensive manner and not having to come back and then piecemeal it. And then when you have members coming and going because they've decided to retire or they have other things in their lives or they move, there's that little bit and shift of perspective. And so being able to have a constant is really difficult. And then when people come to us, they can say, be it planning or zoning, but you made an exception here. And so I just think that moving forward and revisiting all of this and updating our master plan actually makes the job of those volunteer board members easier because they will have a master plan that more closely resembles where the city wants to be going and what fits the needs of the city as we go forward, both for the residents and for the businesses that are living in the city together. So I think that by not having that comprehensive master plan, we're really taking away one of their strongest tools or not giving them the best tool to do the job and make those decisions and make consistent decisions across time. So we'll move forward.
If I could just
Yes.
follow up, I want to clarify that I really appreciate the people who serve on these boards. I acknowledge they are volunteers, and they put in long hours, not only like the zoning board twice a month meeting and hearing these cases until midnight sometimes, but also going out and visiting the properties. They put in a lot of time to do their job. And I don't know if they, I think we're doing them a disservice by not giving them the tools that they need, and maybe they need maybe more training, more guidance as to what the law is. But yes, I acknowledge that my hat's off to them. I thank them very much for their service.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had trainings because it's hard when we don't have the tools for them, so. Any other comments from Alderman? There's no need for a non-public session. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, move to adjourn.
A motion by Alderman Schmidt to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and we are adjourned at 10:12. Thank you very much.